do private call.
We're good. It's working.
There we go. I'll do the same.
Yeah, I want to see that beautiful dude. Oh my god. Thank you. I haven't seen you in a while. Thank God, because this unkempt shit that you had going on was rough. You look beautiful, you beautiful little ginger. The haircut, the trimmed beard, I am fucking loving it. I'm so much happier to see you taking care of your hair.
I'll be honest, I'm missing the ginger fro.
No, the ginger fro was just unkempt. You know what I mean?
There's no way to keep that thing kempt. I'm gonna be honest.
Oh, come on. You could do like that BTS, you know, kind of like Gen Z shit where like you have a real short on the sides and Jew froey up top or something if you wanted.
Oh, but then I'd have to have a fucking Gen Z hair. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not a fucking Zoomer. I technically am a Zoomer, but I don't want to look like one.
Well, I mean, I'm a millennial and look like a millennial. Is that really any better? You know what I mean? Like, is it any better to be a millennial? Like, what's the fucking difference? Is that we're ever so slightly less cringe about our pronouns? That's literally it.
And you like avocado more.
Dude, okay, I'm not gonna lie. I'm on keto right now, and avocado is my saving grace. Like, I'm eating avocado because it's one of the few ways to get potassium. Is like guacamole with pork rinds or like avocado. But not avocado toast, all right? Because I don't get to have the bread.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So you're on keto avocado toast. I think that's an extra layer deep.
Well, no, it's just avocado doesn't have as many carbs as like a lot of other things, and you need like bananas or avocado to for testosterone production, right? Because you get to be my age and you actually have to worry about the food you're eating and whether or not it affects your testosterone. Like at your age, you can like eat Burger King and just like run around like
my dinner
like a bunny.
tonight is Tennant's lager.
I was about to say, is that a form of beer? Oh shit! I'm drinking black coffee and sugar-free energy drink. There is sucralose in this, but no total sugars from alcohol. So I assume it's like probably 1 or 2 grams of carbs.
Yeah, I mean sucralose I think is. Yeah, I have sucralose sweetener, so that's just like artificial sweetener. It's not gonna have any calories.
No, but sucralose, like your body will turn some of it into carbohydrates. Like you have to be careful with it. But nevertheless, to everyone that doesn't know, I don't know why you would be on my fucking channel and not know who LiquidZulu is. You should follow him on YouTube. He is and it's very apropos of the discussion we're about to have. He is what I like to call a compass, which is that AnCaps they always point north no matter what is going on. And if you need to strengthen your idea of theory, you need to have a better understanding of like anything in that regard. He's probably the best content creator I've ever seen in that, better than any of the other AnCap content creators, because he is so utterly focused on what is true north. And you should watch him for that, because he will absolutely strengthen your positions in that regard.
Well, thank you for that. That's very kind.
Yeah, I also mean it as an insult sometimes.
Yeah, that's of course.
You know what I mean?
Hence the name.
The compass. Well, I mean, it always points north, you know, which is good most of the time, I think. I think there are some times where there's some roadblocks. What'd you say?
If you're trying to go north, you need a compass.
We should, if you're an AnCap or a libertarian in our current system, you should always be trying to go north. Period.
If only we had some sort of teleporter to get us straight there, hey?
No, I would not use the teleporter because of the teleportation paradox, because the teleporter would deconstruct me and presumably I could be committing suicide and not know it, because it would make an exact copy at the other end of the teleport and all of us would never know.
What about like, a wormhole or something?
Right, like where your body remains intact?
Yeah.
Okay, I would do that, but like if something that like deconstructs in some type of way, I would never step in that bitch. Ever.
Get married.
I suppose the analogy to strategy would be the Rothbardian button, which instantly just fucking all state functions gone. Mm-hmm. State no longer enforces any of its laws.
So
that would be a bad thing.
We got into a tizzy about it, right? Now, I was trying to talk strategy and was I said some dumb things in the Twitter thread, to be honest, right? I had to come back and clarify my positions, and then it was already like a dog pile from other libertarians, and this fucking asshole over here was fucking over here like, see, this is why you're not in AnCap. And I'm like, motherfucker, this is one of the things I want to talk about, which I think this cringe shit we do, where we're attacking each other instead of trying to educate and build each other up. But I still stand by the position that I don't think the button makes sense. It's kind of my biggest, I think, problem with it. I don't want to reject the analysis at all. But the problem that I have with it is first and foremost, I don't see how we can do that button without it violating, without it, and it be a morally justifiable position. And so that's kind of where I want to start.
Well, we could just imagine that the button, like, it's wizard has created this button, and it's a magic spell which would make it such that everyone who's currently a part of the state and engaged in all these statist activities, all of their enforcement of crime is suddenly, they're just physically incapable of doing it now. Like, they're physically incapable of now committing those crimes.
Right.
Which were
Isn't that a violation of AE, though?
Argumentation ethics.
Yeah, because, like, how do we do that? Do we change their mind? Is it a magic button that takes away their autonomy or their independence or their property in any regard? Because I don't see how that magic button works without it doing one of those things. Like, if everyone still has the same opinions, for example, right, and their property isn't violated, then, like, I don't see that the button actually does anything. Like, it says the state is gone, and then the state is there, unless it, like, physically brainwashes them into having different opinions, or it takes away their property. So, like, I don't really see how the button works.
Like, we could imagine, like, the local ATF agent is about to seize your firearms, and he says, "Hey, I'm coming on there right now." And he's got his
and then his gun just disappears.
His gun like jams or something, and he can no longer shoot at you. And then when he tries to step on your property and trespass, he just gets teleported back outside of it. And he's like, "What the hell?" And he's just not able to do any of the functions which would be aggressive. Any action that he would take, which would be aggression, it's suddenly just
in that regard
negated.
In that regard, I'll push that button like 100%. The issue that I have with the question of, like, the state goes away tomorrow, right, is that, like, I try to think about this in the world, and I'm like, well, what does that mean? And the without context, without explanation of what that button does, what it appears to me is the bank goes away and politicians are all killed or their brains are changed. Like it feels like a mass, like, we're engaged in such a fantastical realm now with what you just described, which is like teleporting off of your property and, like, guns no longer working and, like, all of these things, right? That, like, it totally, I think, changes the way the question is. Because in my head, the only way that button works without some form of like crazy wizardry, as you just described, is that, like, it just destroys the structures of the state, but it destroys people's lives and has all forms of built-in aggression in it that is, like, not a way forward, and also is it's like basically two evil positions that I have to pick from. And then I have to do, like, a consequentialist analysis, because both positions are immoral, to determine, like, what seems like would better fit my goals, because both are evil.
Well, like, this is the thing with Rothbardian strategy, is you are always keeping ethics as first and foremost. And the strategy is derived from the ethics. So the strategy could never contradict the ethics. You could never aggress in order to stop
What happens
aggression.
if both are unethical? What happens if you're in an either-or situation and both are unethical?
Well, you would never be permitted to engage in aggression.
Right. But what happens when you're forced? I mean, do you just handle it like the virtue ethicist at that point, right? Which is like, there's like a trolley cart problem, and the virtue ethicist says, I reject the trolley cart problem in and of itself, because what I'm going to do is do everything I can to stop the train, as opposed to pulling the lever or not pulling the lever, because, like, not pulling the lever is a neutral action. It's a bad example, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, someone says, like, rape a kid or I'm going to rape your wife, and the right answer is you don't make that dichotomy because it's a false choice. You do everything you can to kill the rapist. Is that kind of what you would say, like in that regard?
Well, like even if you in that situation, if we assume literally nothing else, are we? Because there's the question of whether or not raping the child would be aggression because you're being coerced. Are we assuming that it definitely is aggression to rape the child? If we ignore that ethical question of whether you being coerced into doing something.
Ooh, I don't know that it would definitionally fit aggression, but I would still never do it.
Right. So we can put that aside for now. Let's assume that there's some sort of setup where it's like, okay, right, you either aggress. We can do the pluck a hair from a person, or aliens will blow up the planet. Right.
Yeah, I would just pluck a hair from a person. And accept that I made a morally unjustifiable position because I engaged in an act of aggression, but I would almost say that like the threat is in some way some form of coercion.
Right. If we just put aside like that question, because I'm not actually sure whether or not that plays into it. Can we just put that aside to like? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we can put that aside, and that's fine. That's fine. So like yeah. I think there are certain. See, like here's one of the things, and this is something that's always kind of bothered me about argumentation ethics, right? Is like I think there are certain I don't know how to square this, and maybe you can actually help me with this, because like I have a write-up that I did trying to best summarize Hoppe's kind of like what is it called? Not his rebranding, but his like re-explanation of argumentation ethics that he published in his book in '93 and like wrote again in 2017.
Is that Economics and Ethics of Private Property?
Yeah, there's a chapter in it or whatever, and then he like republished it like as a separate article in 2015. Sorry. So like I mean like I'm really trying to understand the shit, but one of the things that always gets me is like, what do you do? Let me back up. I'm a father, right? I recognize that I am going to inherently in my own self violate ethics and do morally unjustifiable actions if they reach over a certain threshold. And what I mean by that is like, let's say for example, someone harms my child. I'm not going to seek restitution, especially if that restitution is denied me. I'm going to go above and beyond into the act of aggression. And like, I have no problem saying that, even though I know that I'm making what is logically like a morally unjustifiable performative contradiction, right? To say that I would support an act of aggression, right? Like basically makes myself an animal unable to make value statements in a regard, right? And then so like there are certain things where the extremes go to a certain degree where my own values override something. And like, I guess, I don't know, like I clash in that because intuitively my gut says so deeply that one should, or that I will accept being an aggressor. And I think it's the same thing with like plucking a hair to save the planet or stealing a penny to save the world, right? Where it's like, I know that this is an unjustifiable position logically. And yet, why would you not steal a penny to save the world? Like if you knew that that was the outcome, right?
Well, like here's the thing that actually a lot of prominent AnCaps get wrong. Like Walter Block gets this wrong, but the objectivists get it right. Is that law is a subset of ethics, and if it is true that you ought not do X, then personal preference be gone, right? It's simply true that you oughtn't do it, and it's true that you ought not rob anyone.
I'm with you. Like I can logically say, right, that the only logical ethical thing there, if you follow argumentation ethics, which I don't see once you actually get it, that you can't not, right? It is logically true that you can't make the claim or make a valid claim to be able to say that it is okay to steal a penny to save the world. And yet our moral intuitions would almost everyone would steal a penny to save the world. Almost everyone would pluck a hair to stop the violent alien invasion, right? So like my question is like, what like I'm being sincere and open here, right? As opposed to just, you know, saying what I know is right. Like I could say what I know is right and just like, you know, cope and bury that and just go, no, I'd never steal a penny to save the world. But if I'm honest with myself, I would, right? Like if presented in that situation, that's the choice I would make, accept that it's wrong and accept that I'm a criminal and, you know, take the punishment. And I don't think anyone would even want to punish me at that point, right? You know what I mean? Like, so, I mean, like, I guess my question is how do you deal with that? How do you deal with extremes that are so extreme that logically you know the right answer, and yet your moral intuition screams to run in the other direction?
Well, like, I'm actually listening to a lecture series by, can't remember his name, he's some prominent objectivist, I'm sure somebody will remind me later. Basically...
Like Peikoff, maybe, or...
Yeah, Peikoff, Leonard Peikoff.
Leonard Peikoff's, yeah.
Yeah, he's going over the history of philosophy, and, like, you know, the way I see it is the reason why moral intuition. That's
a great series, by the way. I think I've listened to that one before. He's an asshole the whole time, but like, especially when he talks about Kant or Hegel or something, but still great series.
Great series, yeah. And like the reason why our moral intuitions are screaming at us to go against what we know is correct ethics, what we should do, is because we've had like centuries and millennia of just wrong philosophy building up our society. We've had it bred into us from like birth that, you know, be humble, don't be prideful, when we know that you should be prideful. You know, we have it that, oh, you should be altruistic. We know that you shouldn't, in fact, be altruistic. Right. We know that aggression is wrong. We know that taxation is theft. And yet we've had it bred into us that taxation is great. It's good because you're helping the poor or whatever. And you need to, as a true like philosopher thinker, need to overcome these barriers, just as we have both overcome the barrier of taxation being this great thing. Right. We should also both come over this barrier of robbing a penny being a great thing, because the robbing of the penny is exactly the same as taxation, right? So if we're going to be saying that, yeah, I would go ahead and rob that penny, then the state's going to just say, well, yeah, okay, I get that taxation is wrong, but I'm still going to go ahead and support taxation anyway. You know that person's talking shit. They're insane. They're not speaking rationally there.
I agree with you to a point, right? Like I certainly think, you know, propaganda and socialization, right, have played a role into this. But I also think I would also kind of posit two other things that I think play a factor. Number one, psychologically, I think the default position for humans is consequentialism. And the reason I say that is that if you don't think about philosophy at all, right, you're not educated in any form of philosophy. I don't know that it's purely just propaganda and our culture that gives you a consequentialist analysis. I think it's natural to be a consequent, and I don't mean natural in like the Rothbardian sense. I mean like nature. It's natural to be a consequentialist because that is like you live in a world where you make actions and then observe the consequences of those actions, and often determine whether or not you like what you did based off of like what occurred from previous behavior. That's kind of like how we learn in a lot of ways, like in a very simplistic way. So I think a lot of people's default position kind of naturally flows into consequentialism because it just kind of makes sense to their brain that like, oh yeah, we determine what's right or wrong based off of like what happens off of what we do, right? And the other thing that I would add is that I don't know, it seems a little bit like Cope to think that it's purely indoctrination when it comes to things that are so drastic in the consequences and so minor in the actions, right? Like, I think stealing a penny to save the world is something people would probably do even if they weren't propagandized. You know what I mean? Like if they had no basis in philosophy, and even if they were like raised in an objectivist, let's say commune, right? And like, you know, their whole life,
Galt's Gulch,
right? Galt's Gulch, right? Not the one that failed in South America, but like, you know, raised to always believe A is A, existence is existence. There's no God, right? Like altruism is evil. You should never sacrifice yourself, etc. When given the position of like, you know, okay, 1 million people are going to die and your life is going to be inherently horrible. Well, actually, I think the objectivists would just choose to save a penny to save the world anyways, because they're fucking statist to a certain degree, and they believe that it's okay because it'll hurt yourself.
I'll add a footnote there that I think
Okay.
Proper objectivists are anarcho-capitalists. They are anarchists. I think it's
I tried that with Yaron Brook and it didn't work. I was like, fucking debate me on it. Like, where's your fucking, like, he didn't have anything except for like Hoppa's a racist. I was like, come on, man.
Yeah. Anyway, I think I interrupted you, so I'll let you.
No. I mean, that was basically the crux of my argument, right? Like when something is so extreme and you know that the damage that's going to be done to yourself, right? It's not even altruism at that point, right? Because like stealing the penny is like, obviously you're going to value your life and the world that you live in and the relationships you have and the ability to engage with society and trade and things. All of those things are high values to you. So it's not altruism. It's a selfish action. And it's a selfish action to save everything that you value by committing what you know is a crime and doing an unjustifiable position. So like, you can't call it a moral act. You can say, I would do that, but you can't say it is right to do that. And so, but my question is like, is there a point where right and wrong kind of leave reality and right and wrong almost don't matter or can't matter? Or like, you know what I mean? Like this is a legitimate question and concern as someone that is honestly trying to square my philosophy as an AnCap, not someone trying to critique like the weakness of AnCap philosophy.
Right. So I think the thing is, if you know that something is right, something you should do, and you know that you would in fact not do that right thing, you should spend a great deal of your effort on trying to make it such that you would do the right thing, because you know it's the right thing to do. And, you know, for the objectivist who decides to steal a penny, the objectivist person who grew up on an objectivist commune, I would say, like, you know, they've probably not understood it correctly. Like, they should have been spending their time, you know, understanding that objectivism is not just about mere preservation of life. It's about actually living a good life. And it's not a good life to go around robbing people. That is just preserving your life.
Right. I mean, like, but that's taking the point to a Piagetian scenario, right? Like, that's taking it out of the in tempori like situation, and then saying, like, you know, what happens when we do that, when we live in a world where this occurs over and over again. But what I'm saying is, like, is it two evil actions? Because, like, is it essentially coercion at that point? Steal a penny to save the world. Is it if you know unequivocally that stealing the penny actually saves the world, what I would say, at least, right, in the way that I understand, is that it's just a form of coercion of circumstance. Can you be coerced by circumstances? That's really what I mean to say. If you know that in order to save the world, you must commit an act of evil, is it considered an act of evil to do so, or is it coercion? Because it's not a person that coercing you with a gun to your head, right? But it's simply, I know that the consequence of my action is a great atrocity will occur, and then if I commit this crime, the great atrocity won't occur. Is that like almost like a naturalistic form of coercion? Well, definitionally, like, it's not.
Like, yeah, that, like, nature can't coerce you, right? It might be the case,
but it can kill you.
You know, yeah, it can kill you, and, you know, then you should make like Socrates and die at that point, right? You should accept the fate that this horrible thing will happen, you know, because you have, like, you're a precognition person, whatever,
right?
You know, you can see the future, and you know that robbing this person of a penny will, through some crazy chain of events, lead to the world being saved from a meteor or whatever, right? You should still not steal that penny. You know that you shouldn't steal that penny. It's necessarily true that you should not steal the penny. And so you should, if you think that you would indeed steal that penny, you should try and stop yourself, right? You should put barriers in the place of you stealing that penny. You should make it such that it would be inconceivable to you to steal that penny.
Right. I mean, I understand that. I do. And, like, I know that that's right. And yet, I know as well as that I can't, for whatever reason, I can't accept that. Right? Like, I know that there's some barrier, some psychological barrier, right, to me, that some part of my intuition, some part of my gut, some part of my being, right, screams out, dude, just steal the fucking penny and then apologize and tell the person, yo, I stole your penny. I'm sorry. Here's $100 as restitution. I know that I fucked up. And yet there's even a worse part of me that would intuitively believe that what I did was make a moral decision in doing so, a self-sacrificial moral position. So the objectivists can be mad at me too while we're here, right? And yet, you know what I mean? Like, yet logically, I know that it is not a morally justifiable position to say that one can steal a penny to save the world, right? That it's not a sound logical position, but like, I can't argue against that like, I mean, like, and so here's my question to you. Do you have that intuition as well? Like, do you believe, like, honestly, if you were in a situation where the world was going to be nuked and you knew for a fact that, like, you could take one penny from someone and deal with the consequences later, that you wouldn't do it in your heart of hearts?
Well, here's the thing you don't know about me. I'm very autistic. So I would instantly be considering, like, I do this all the time. I consider, right, is this action aggressive? Is it in keeping with, you know, what ethics I understand? Yada, yada, yada. I.e., will this lead me to a good life or not? And, you know, I don't know what I would do in such a crazy situation. I may very well be evil there, right? And I try and stop that every day by learning ethics and making sure that I don't make these errors. And like, this point about our intuitions err, seemingly. It's not just in ethics that our intuitions err, because we make these errors all over the place. Like, you're an Austrian, right?
Yes.
Are you an Austrian?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm an Austrian. I mean, like, I sometimes, how do I put this? I think Austrian economics is the only correct form of economics. I think that Chicago style certainly is better than Keynesian and MMTers. The one thing that I think errs me sometimes from just like being full-blown Austrian, or saying that I'm full-blown Austrian, is that, like, in terms of strategy is another thing, right? Like, I don't know. I'm an Austrian. Like, I think that, like, that modern economic theory, right, is based upon, I won't call it pseudoscience, but it's based upon making scientific claims as facts and reality that are really just historical facts, and you're unable to isolate variables, right? And so, like, I think you do need, like, methodological individualism and like certain Austrian economic things. The issue, though, that I have is that I do find some utility I think that modern economic theory can retroactively sometimes help us in context develop better theories of human action. And I think some Austrians just deny all economic theory and studies. And it's like, no, these can sometimes help us better understand whether or not maybe we're right or wrong in our thinking of human action in praxeology.
Well, here's the thing. Hoppe goes over this in Economics and Ethics of Private Property. He says, like, you know, in the correct context, the statistical models and stuff, perfectly fine. If you're saying, right, this is an analysis of the statistical relationship over this period of history between these variables, perfectly legitimate. What's not legitimate is then saying, okay, and therefore this is a law of economics that we've derived out of it. That is the illegitimate part. And basically what I was getting into with the whole are you an Austrian question was, like, we know that, you know, plenty of economists in their intuition of, you know, the empirical sciences, you know, the a posteriori sciences, they felt very strongly that, well, economics is probably also empirical. Like, Keynes, he had a background in the a posteriori sciences, so he thought, right, this probably applies here as well. And it's the same with physics as well. Like back in the old days, it was very clearly human intuition that if something is moving along, there has to be a constant thing pushing it, because if we want something to move along the ground, we have to be constantly pushing it. But we know from more modern, like classical physics and even more modern relativistic physics that, well, no, if you push something, it's going to keep going forward unless something is pushing back on it. So our intuitions are also getting broken up there. Our intuitions are not always the best compass, to borrow your term, in understanding what is true. And the point of philosophy is understanding what is and is not true.
No, for sure. Like I understand that. The thing that I just say about the intuitions, right, is like obviously intuitions are often false, right? And we see this in psychology all of the time, right? I mean, like even if many of their studies are similarly to the economists, a little bit soft sciencey, pseudosciency, right? But regardless, we can see experimentally. In laboratory experiments where they're pretty fucking good at isolating variables, certainly better than economists, right? All the time where like our intuitions, lead us astray to even the nature of reality, like even the way that our brain interprets senses. But the thing is that like when in dealing with like an extreme example, I think it's like, I can logically argue that you're correct, right? I can logically argue that it's a morally unjustifiable position to steal a penny to save the world. I can logically argue that intuitions are often wrong, and that, just because one has an intuition, we can recognize that our intuition is at best probabilistic, and that, logic based off of axioms that are provably true is not. And so the correct choice is to not steal a penny to save the world, right? Like you cannot logically argue anything but that, because it's an act of aggression. And yet the intuition is so strong, it's difficult not to feel like there's a piece of the puzzle missing. You know what I mean? Like it's difficult not to feel like to search for what you want to believe is true as opposed to what is true. You know what I mean? Like you almost want to look for an argument, like it's coercive in some way or something's not right, because like, how do you know what I mean? Like, how do you, it's almost like if like you and I can agree on this, but if I had to take this to anybody, including the random people that are just showing up in Twitch chat, you know what I mean? Like you could almost never, you could never socially argue in a market-based justice system, right? That like you made the right position.
You have not met me at parties, bro. I have multiple times I have gone into anarcho-capitalist theory.
That's the worst thing I've ever heard. This is the biggest defense against getting laid I've ever heard in my entire life. But I'm just, you know what I'm saying though, right? Like if there was, let's say there's two Earths, right? And one Earth is destroyed, save a penny to save the world, right? But there's a whole nother Earth. And like option A is steal the penny, option B is not steal the penny. Either way, you go to court, right? Like, and in a market justice system, right? Even based off of anarcho-capitalist philosophy, like I would say that if you don't steal that penny, it's very likely that you might actually be charged in arbitration for some sort of pseudo crime that you didn't commit, just because the way humans intuitively feel is that what you did was wrong. And if you did indeed steal the penny, I would think almost any arbitration for whatever insurance company was handling the insurance for Earth A, if you will, right, would look at you and go, yeah, you're good. You know what I mean? There's no need for a trial here. Like, restitution is paid by you saving the fucking world. You know what I mean? Like,
but then you have the question of where the fuck do we end this, right?
Right.
Because then you can say
the government can make the same argument. Yeah.
Yeah. The courts right now, if I were to become, prime IRS Gestapo member, and I were to start doing this stuff, they'd be like, don't worry, bro, you're good. I'm committing crimes, but I'm free, right? I have the freedom to move about. I'm allowed to do things, right? But I'm committing crimes. Versus somebody who is defending people who don't want to pay their taxes and saying, no, don't attack these people, and they end up going to jail. I would much rather be the person who is good, who is defending those people who don't want to pay their taxes, as opposed to being the tax man.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused by your analogy.
So
I apologize.
I would much rather be the person who is good, but is going to jail for it. You know, the person who's defending people who don't want to pay their taxes, as opposed to being the person who's bad and isn't going to jail for it, isn't being punished for being bad. You know, the tax man there.
Right. But I mean, you pay your taxes, right?
Yes.
Right. But okay. But that's the thing, right? Is I think we engage in evil acts that we know are morally unjustifiable.
Well, paying taxes isn't evil. That's you're being
coerced.
Robbed.
Yeah, you're being coerced.
Being robbed isn't evil, right?
That's true. That's yeah, I'll give you that, right? Like you're obviously coerced into doing it. It's not like a contract or anything, right? And even if it was a contract, it would be an unconscionable contract, or not unconscionable. It would be a contract done under duress, so therefore not a valid contract. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. Yeah, I don't know, like the way that I see the penny to save the world analogy type situation, right, is that I don't think humanity will ever really reach the kind of, I don't want to call it utopian, but like a perfect justice system. Like, I don't think practically what is logically right and what is logically wrong is something that even necessarily like works in you know, like can work, like maybe locally in like in an autistic commune, you know what I mean? Right. But like overall, even if anarchism was achieved in the world, right, I think what you would likely have is a certain consideration that occurs in arbitration and in market systems, as well as in contracts that kind of excuse away or demand certain behavior, right? So I'll give an example, which is like in car insurance, right? One of the things that's really interesting in car insurance is, and they don't tell you this most of the time, right? But if you ask them, they'll tell you, but it's not something they just like publicize. There's four basic levels. In some it's 5, but in American car insurance companies, right, there's 4 basic levels. There's like the call center people, like the people that take your initial claims and like do all of that, right? There's property damage, there's health and body, and then there's litigation, right? And so things escalate. So you go to the call center, and then if it's determined that there's only property damage, it goes to a property damage specialist. If someone's physically wounded, it goes to level 3. And if like people refuse, if 2 companies can't agree and their clients can't agree, it'll go to litigation, and eventually it'll go to court. 97% of things don't go to court, right? It's only 3% that ever see like a day in court. So the thing is that let's say your face is injured. Well, one of the things that's really interesting is that the insurance companies have these charts that they use that they don't tell people about, which determines the value of damage to the face. And what it basically says is we've determined that your face is worth this much money based off of your age, your gender, your profession, etc. So if you're, and including how attractive you are. So if we were to take an OnlyFans girl Twitch streamer, right, and her face is injured versus, let's say, my face or your face, her face is worth a lot more money than your face, right? So like all of this restitution is built up into an approximation of the value of someone's face. But the fact of the matter is we don't actually know what the value of that person's face is. We don't have a crystal ball. Like we can't see into the future. We don't know that this person in 1 month, their career would have been ruined anyways, or that like, we don't know how this person's going to age, right? You know what I mean? Like maybe they age horribly because they've been doing too much cocaine. Maybe they take really good care of their face and it would age better, right? So there's all these other variables that we can't really determine. And so like, I think in similarly in like a market justice system, this idea of stealing a penny to save the world situation is that like, we can logically deduce that one ought not steal the penny, right? Like, I don't know that logic or argumentation ethics tells us what we ought to do, but it tells us what we ought not do, right?
Well, the negation of that is then an ought do, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if there's a moral system or like there's several different moral systems of what one ought to do that would fit within lines of argumentation ethics, right?
Well, I mean, if we know what people ought not do, then we know that they ought to do the negation of that, right?
Well, yeah. Well, let's say, for example, homosexual sex versus straight sex. Argumentation ethics doesn't tell us who we should have sex with. It just tells us that it's wrong for us to punish other people for having sex with whoever they want to have sex with. But it doesn't necessarily tell us what to do, right? It just tells us the negation of what not to do, which is we're not allowed to go punish people for having sex with whomever they want. But it doesn't tell us like what we should do in our sex life.
That's the thing. I think it. I don't think argumentation ethics covers all of ethics. Like, you know.
Right.
I don't think it necessarily any given ought statement you could come up with, you can figure out whether it's true or false.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that. I don't know if that's the case. It might be the case. I don't know if it is the case. But certainly there are ethical propositions like, you know, I think objectivism is probably provable. I'm not like, you know, super expert on objectivism. I'm just learning right now. But, you know, given the base proposition of life over death, well, that's certainly indefensible. The negation of that.
I want to be.
You can argue death over life, right?
If I've been talking to objectivists and looking at a pretty decent amount of some of their stuff for a while now, because from the early days, for whatever reason, quite a few objectivists found me and hung out in our Discord and stuff. So I would say this: be careful with that, because some people look at objectivism as like the axioms, right? But most objectivists would say that objectivism is the philosophy of Ayn Rand. And so there are certainly things that Ayn Rand said that I would say are wrong. Specifically her take on abortion. I'm an evictionist. Right? And like, she's like, you can abort up until birth, basically. You know what I mean? Like, so be careful, because sometimes when you say objectivism, objectivists will hear that and go, Rand.
Sure, but you know, I don't give a shit what objectivists think.
Well, we know. I mean it from a strategical point, but I also mean it like definitionally. When you say objectivism, I think sometimes it's better to make clear that you mean the axioms of objectivism and not necessarily the philosophy of Rand.
Yeah. I think it's a lot like saying Aristotelianism as opposed to Aristotle's philosophy. Like, I'm not saying Randianism. I'm saying objectivism. By the way, can I just go to the toilet real quick?
Yeah, go to the toilet. All right, so boys, you know, this is not our normal content. This is what I'm titling today as Nerd Wars, right? The reason I'm calling it Nerd Wars is I'm talking to LiquidZulu, who is a fellow anarcho-capitalist, and we get to talk about, you know, deeper theory of our extreme nerdy philosophy. This is not like me talking to a leftist or someone that doesn't understand AnCap, but instead this is going deep into anarcho-capitalist philosophy. I think it's a fun way to start our Saturday. Tell Zulu that he's living in Ancapistan in his head. Yeah, right. I kind of feel that way with the take a penny to save the world, to be honest, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, as much as I know that it's illogically untrue and I can't advocate for it, like, I just know that I would make that decision. I don't know how to, you know what I mean? I know you're being ironic because you just want to piss him off, but like, but actually tell him that. It would be funny. Yeah. I'll have to wait till the appropriate moment and then smile afterwards. Our morals objective says halal alpha. I don't know. Well, the objectivists would say so. But I would say that morals they have to be logically justified. If they're illogical or better yet to say if they're not valid as well, then they can't be true. What is going on with your camera lag, my brother?
Oh, is there a big lag?
Oh, like it picks you up speaking fine, but I don't know.
Is that looking fine?
It's looking better now. When you sit down, maybe it's the autofocus feature of your camera lags it out trying to focus.
This one is like El Cheapo. It definitely doesn't have an autofocus. It might just be Discord like compression or something.
Okay. Yeah, so where were we?
I do have something here that you said. You said you don't think humanity will ever reach perfect justice, and I think I can entirely agree. I don't think, perfect justice is something that you could maintain, but it's something that you should always be moving towards.
Yeah.
You always know that it's better to have perfect justice than non-perfect justice. You shouldn't
I agree.
acquiesce to a state of non-perfect justice. You should always be saying, that is unjust. It's unjust that you did that. Don't do that.
Yeah, I would say it's like an asymptote, mathematically, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like you're kind of always, it's better to constantly get closer and closer, but it's a thing that the flaws
you're
of
taking the limit of it.
Yeah, the flaws of humanity, right? And human action is that we err. We always err. We err in our logic, we err in our thinking, we err in our behavior, etc. And so because of that simple fact of reality, right? There will always be imperfect systems of justice. I feel the same way about, for example, the death penalty, because I think, I had a really long talk with Casimir and MRH, right? My original position for a while has been that I don't think you can justify, the death penalty, but having thought
and
through
then
it.
The MRH sorted you out, did he?
Yeah, he sorted me out. Well, I mean, it took a long, we had to build like a logic tree for it, right? Because the arguments that I were hearing were just like, no, you're wrong. And it's like, okay, well, that's cool. But like, that doesn't help, right? I'm a talking head. I'm an entertainer, right? I recognize that I'm never going to be as good as like Walter Block or people like you that like your primary goal is pure education. I recognize.
I do like that you're about to say you before you said Walter Block. I do appreciate that a lot.
I love Walter Block, but I'm just saying, like, there are people that are thinkers, and I strive to be close to that, right? But I don't see myself writing any piece of theory anytime soon. What I see myself doing is doing what I do, engaging in debates with lefties, looking and doing news analysis, reading some stuff and talking about it, etc., and introducing people to these ideas in a more friendly manner so that they can go find people like you, right? But like, anyways, getting back to the death penalty thing, one of the issues that I have is that I don't think you can ever really justify the death penalty, because reiterating the death penalty, you're eventually going to make a mistake, right? And so at some point you're going to kill an innocent person. Now, is it just, so I think it's morally justifiable. Well, not morally justifiable. Let me back that up. The negation, I guess, could be, but I think it is, if someone kills you, right, you can't logically argue to not be killed, right? Mm-hmm. Like if I kill your sister, I can't then argue that like it's some form of aggression. Like, no, fuck you. You didn't follow the nap, right? Like you didn't follow that. You took that. I demand some form of restitution. And like that restitution could be death, or it could be some form of enslavement, or we could come up with some financial figure that is acceptable and voluntarily works. And, you go to jail and do some amount of time. We'd come to some form of agreement voluntarily. But like, but the onus of like us to respect your life is gone. But at the same time, the reality is that given a system of justice, even a market system that's going to be better than our current one, there are going to be mistakes. Eventually, we're going to kill an innocent man. And the only way to fix that is to then demand the death of everyone that was involved in advocating for through justice, those that committed an act of aggression against that person, because that person was an innocent and you committed an act of aggression against them. And so now they get to do it. And now we get into this weird kind of like Hatfield and McCoy situation where we're all killing each other in revenge killings because of a mistake that was proven later. So like, I don't know that you can actually, so like, how do you feel about that? Like, is it justified to advocate for the death penalty knowing that there will eventually be mistakes?
So I'll give you two answers to this. The first answer will be the answer I go for. Mm-hmm. And the second answer is going to be what I can remember of my friend and I's response to this type of thing. and he's like the smartest guy I know. He's an objectivist.
Okay.
And so he's incorporating objectivist epistemology into it. So my answer is that when I'm constructing legal theory, I'm looking at it through a God's eye view. So where you know all the facts. So
Right.
it is definitely just in some cases to have a death penalty.
Yes.
Therefore, it's just to advocate that people should be allowed to enact a death penalty. And also that, you know, your criticism would apply to literally every form of punishment. It's
Yes.
always going to be true that, you know, you could be wrong with punishment. What my friend Nye says is, well, you have to trust the sense data, and he might be shouting at me about this later. I'll have to ask him about it, because it's been a while since I've heard his argument about
All right,
this.
enough apology. I want to hear the base take.
Yeah. So it's, you know, you have to trust your senses. You have to trust what is coming in. So given some amount of evidence that has come in,
Mhm.
you have to be able to act on that evidence to,
Right.
you know, punish. If you have sufficient evidence to punish, then you have to be able to act on that, and it's not aggression to act on the sufficient evidence that you have. I don't know what sufficient evidence qualifies as, because again, I'm not an objectivist. Not yet, at least.
Right. So what you're
but,
basically
yeah.
saying is like the world we live in is, you know, probabilistic, right? Based off of the evidence that we have. We make a determination about what is true and what is untrue based off of all of the evidence that we have available, but like that doesn't mean we're always right. And so, but like if we were to work off of the idea that one can't kill someone because we know that there's an incredibly small probability, no matter what, that we are wrong in doing so. If we follow that logic through to its conclusions, one would not be able to make any actions in the world because those actions might turn out to be unjustified, right? So we have to work with the information and the data that we have available. My question then is it a form of aggression if one kills an innocent person, believing totally and truly in their heart that they were doing the right thing?
I'm saying yes. I think that is aggression. I think, because I'm taking the God's eye approach to this, where, you know, we have defined it in the saying of the hypothetical that it is an innocent person that is being killed. So we know for a fact that it is aggression.
Right. But like, so Casimir's in my chat. He brings up an interesting point, which I think is an interesting distinction between death and all other forms of punishment, right? Which he says, no, this is not the problem. Being wrong about the limited finite damage is less of a problem than causing such damage that has infinite value, right? So the human life has presumably an incalculable infinite value, whereas let's say imprisoning someone or making them pay a certain restitution in terms of damages in the form of, you know, barter, trade, currency, has a finite value.
Well, like, what is value in law then? Because I know about value in ethics, value in like non-legal ethics. I know is objectively, you know, comparable. Value in economics is definitely not comparable. But what value are we talking about here? I don't know what value would mean in law.
Well, how does one determine restitution?
So restitution is basically restoring the person into the counterfactual state. So if you liked my vape better than yours and you took it from me, then you'd have to, I still own that vape, you'd have to give me back this vape, so because I still own it. That is restitution. Retribution would be, you have to give me back another equivalent vape. I'm allowed to take an equivalent vape from you as retribution.
Right, but let's say I damage that vape, right?
Yeah, then you'd have to give me back a vape in the quality that you took it from me.
Right, but now you're adding value into the system, which is how much do you value the vape that can't be returned? What is it worth to you? And that's a subjective state for you as an individual, right? Like I can't determine the value of that vape. I can't just say, well, that vape costs $90 because maybe that's your favorite vape and they no longer make that vape. And you really like that vape because it just feels good in your hands. There's no other $90 vape that really matches the value of what was taken. And therefore there's some subjective value that's placed on it. And I think this plays a role in restitution in law, right? Like if I can return you the original property in its original state, right? Plus whatever fees you had to pay in order to track me down or get thing back, right? Then like restitution's done. But if I'm incapable of returning it, which I think is obviously applies in that of the family members of a human life that was stolen, right? I can't push a magic button and resurrect your family member in the same exact state. I can't give you back your family member, right? And so I kind of think that's kind of what we're talking about in terms of the value here is the subjective value of all of those that have relationships with that human individual has to be returned in some capacity, except I can't return the original property, which is I can't return the individual. There's no way to perfectly do that unless we place some subjective value in order to try and rectify the situation to the best of our ability.
Right, so I think in the case of murder, it's impossible to restitute, I agree. But that's just simply the facts of the matter. You cannot restitute that, so there is no restitution. There is no just restitution.
Right.
But there is just retribution. You could kill them, right? And then they might not want to die. I imagine they don't want to die. And so you negotiate. You say, hey, instead of us killing you, because we're allowed to kill you now, by the way, instead you give us $10 million over the course of 50 years.
Right.
You work for us, right? You know, that's how you deal with that. If you want some sort of financial penalty on their part. But yeah, no, there is no... In natural law, there is no just restitution for murder. None that I see. Unless there was a resurrection machine around.
Right. MRH told me to bring it up at some point, and so I just want to say you're living in AnCapistan in your head.
Of course, yeah.
This is where I think this is why I brought up the insurance thing. Because like we can talk about the theory all day, but what does it practically look like? And what I think the answer practically looks like is like the insurance thing with damages to faces. Is that like you can never really determine the value of that because it's a subjective value to the individual, right? And even their subjective evaluation could be wrong, even more so, I think is even you know what I mean? Like what their subjective value to their face is and their ability to actually communicate that is two different things, right? You could claim that your vape is worth $1 million, but the only way to test that is to find another one exactly like it and see if you're willing to work to save up $1 million in order to get that exact vape back, right? So like we can't know that your claim or even your feelings or thoughts on the matter of what you believe to value something is true, right? And so I think what would occur in reality, right, is that an insurance company, works out these things and possibly they work in forms of arbitration, and there's some sort of like voluntarily negotiated kind of compromise that occurs where people often are unsatisfied, but that is just kind of the nature of the situation of criminal behavior occurring in the first place.
So you've made an error there. You've said, my vape couldn't be worth $1 million. I mean, I agree. I don't think any vape could be worth N dollars, where N is any number.
Right.
Because it's not an equivalence. It's if I was willing to accept a vape in exchange for $1 million, I must want the vape more than that $1 million.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't have this equivalence. For this whole insurance thing of, how do you insure these things? Right. It has to be coded in contract law for it to be legally valid at all. If it's not coded in contract law, it doesn't matter. Right? Doesn't matter. You just go back to bare restitution, retribution.
Right. But what I mean to say is that I think we will likely voluntarily, the thing that makes the most sense from a practical standpoint that will likely occur, right, is that we will voluntarily give our negotiation rights away in some capacity. I'm not saying whether or not this is right or wrong. I'm simply saying what will likely occur is that we will give up our ability to negotiate, or some form of it, to a rights enforcement agency that has, you know, approximate evaluations of the of what they deem contractually the value of these things are, right?
Sure, maybe that does happen.
Did you run the dishwasher? It's so weird. Somebody turned the heat on in their apartment or some shit? I don't know.
Sorry, it's just the heat flowing from my room into yours.
Okay. Oh, that's right. You're in that godforsaken part of Europe where they don't have ACs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's entirely possible that, like, you know, it would be enforced via contract law, and that's entirely fine. But what I'm studying here and what I'm trying to elucidate here is, sans any contracts, what do we have, right?
Right.
Also, on top of that, what do contracts do? What is the entire corpus of what is and is not legal? You know, we can't just assume, okay, they'd agree to do this. Well, no. What if they don't agree to do this, you know? And this is my argument against group ownership. It's like, well, if this entire group of people agree to use this stick in this way, then they all own it. It's like, well, no. What happens if they don't agree to use it in that way? Well, if one person in that group of people wants to use it in a different way, what happens then? Well, it seems that they don't all actually own it. So
no, I think you have a. I think
for all these counter examples.
I mean, getting into this is not a strong area for me, but like title, you can rent property, right? So like, because I think that's the way to the way to like the easiest analogy to try and understand title, as far as I've seen, right? So you can rent property, and so does one own the house that they rent? No, but do they have some exclusive right to it? Yes, I would say that there is what renting is a transfer of title with stipulations, and if said person violates that contract, then the stipulations occur and the title is then exchanged to the person, the landlord, if you will, right? Yeah. So I would say if you rent property, you are selling your property with stipulations in a contract to the person renting the property. They are now the rightful owner of this, but they signed a contract saying that in order to own this, they wouldn't punch holes in the wall. They would allow said person to come onto the premises with 48 hours notice, at least twice, whatever your stipulations are, right? And if you violate that contract, then it says in the contract that the title is then exchanged to the landlord. You no longer own this thing. And there might even be protections for you that say the title is exchanged after, we determine that you violated it. You have a right to, go before this arbitration committee, and you have 60 days before the title transfer goes through, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. Some renter's rights built into the contract, but ultimately there is only one owner of the house, and it is not, it is when you sign a rental agreement, it is not the landlord. It is the person that signed the rental agreement that is the owner of that property pursuant to the stipulations in that contract.
Yeah, and you could even do it the other way around, where the landlord still owns it, but they agree to allow the renter to do various things, or else they'll transfer to them $1 trillion, or
Right, yeah.
Yeah,
you can do that.
I completely agree there.
So, like, my issue is then how do we explain the validity or the non-validity of, let's say, a covenant community that agrees to certain pseudo-public institutions, right? Is that allowed?
Well, you just have to do it through contract still. Maybe, hey, if you don't pay into this, the easiest way to do it would just be to have the covenant community have some CEO or whatever who owns the entire community under like very strict stipulations as to what they're allowed to do and whatnot, or else it gets broken up, right? And then
I just got your DM over Twitter.
Yeah.
I just looked at. Sorry. Continue.
So yeah, the easiest way to do it is just have like the CEO owns the whole thing under some very strict stipulations as to what happens if he breaks various rules, and if you want to move on to that covenant community, you have to pay them to be allowed to be on their property, right?
Right.
And if you build a house and stuff, you can have extra stipulations as to what exactly happens if you build a nice structure, right? How the valuation.
Right. So your answer is basically there's a CEO. He sets up AnCapistan town, right? Or not AnCapistan, because it's not AnCapistan. He sets up, the covenant community of the United States of America, somewhere in Florida, right? And sets up could set up a system of governance and even a monopoly on like a monopolistic police agency or whatever. But you go there, you choose to buy property there, and the stipulation to buy property there from the landowner, the CEO that bought all this land to begin with, you can buy it from them, but there's stipulations in the contract in order to follow all of these things. And maybe you even have what you call a president, and you can elect a president democratically if you want. But the way that it is that it's actually a title transfer from the previous CEO to a new CEO, and everyone agreed to the he agreed in the drafting of that contract, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So
yeah,
I could see that, right? Like I could see that. The issue that I always bring up with this, right, is the only way that I think that this is valid is that there is some form of communally decided age of consent, right? And we can have legal systems of emancipation and or non-emancipation, right, to determine whether or not someone is an adult, right, or whether or not someone is no longer an emergent adult, but a person that has the capacity to consent. Whenever that occurs, that person has to be allowed to either sign the contract or be a guest in this area and leave freely. The moment that that person is coerced into signing the contract or coerced to in any fashion beyond just being on someone else's private property, as I think once we get into an issue. And the reason I say that is because like people talk about, well, what about, ANCOMs that want to have their commune? Let them have their commune. But the moment a child becomes an adult and they don't ask them to sign a contract and they just make them live in their society by their rules is the moment that this is no longer, that this is kidnapping.
Yeah, if you're making somebody live in your commune and you're not allowing them to leave, then yeah, you've imprisoned them. That's not just.
So,
well, I should say unjustly imprisoned them.
Right. So what happens? What happens? And this is, I'm just curious about this. I have my answer, but this is a little devil's advocate. Please don't think this is my position. What happens, right, when there's nowhere left to move? What happens when like all of America, or let's say all of the Americas, is all under this one contract system by this one private property owner, and you don't have the financial means upon reaching adulthood to leave? What do you do then? What's the answer there from a theoretical perspective?
The answer is to go ahead and cry about it, I suppose. It's not, yeah, boo-hoo, who cares, right? Find someone who will take you in or die, I suppose, right?
Right, but then aren't we then recreating social contract theory?
No, because this is an explicit contract.
Right. But you don't have the ability to move financially. You don't have the means to leave. And because you don't have
some people
so isn't it a contract signed under duress at that point?
Nope.
Or undue influence, I should say.
I don't know what that means.
So in contract law, right, in common law, right, there are 4 types of invalid contracts. One of them. If
you're gonna talk about common law, I'm gonna get angry.
Well, okay, but I'm you can get angry, right? But I'm testing the limits, right, to determine whether or not these things are valid within our system, right? Getting your opinion on them. But in contract law, you have basically 4 types of like invalid contracts, right? One of them really doesn't matter here, which is illegality. The state determines a certain law and the contract breaks the law. Therefore, it's an invalid contract, right? One of them is duress, which is essentially coercion, right? You're forced to sign a contract, but you're coerced into doing so. Therefore, it's an invalid contract. One of them is undue influence, right? And so undue influence, for example, would be, let's say I own a restaurant, right? And I have a contract with someone, and I my intuition is that undue influence doesn't matter to us at all. And undue influence is basically, I have a contract, and let's say I need raw materials from these people, and everything's fine with the raw materials from these people, but they recognize that, like, in order for my business to succeed, I need their raw materials. And so then what I do is I recognize that I'm their only place of getting these raw materials now. And so I jack the prices up like 10,000%, right? And so then I sign that contract. That's what's considered undue influence. And then the fourth one, which I don't think that that's necessarily valid at all in our philosophy. So I think two of these actually aren't valid. I think duress is, and I think the next one is, which is unconscionable. Unconscionable is a vaguely determined thing, but basically it's where the contract is full of so much legalese and like so much hidden things that like people are unable to like determine what it is that they're actually signing, right? So like they think they're signing a contract that means one thing, but like unless you had like a team of lawyers go through the contract, you would realize that that's not actually what the contract is saying. And so the contract is selling itself in one capacity. It's basically like a form of fraud, but it's not fraud in the way that it's defined in like English or American common law. Like the Supreme Court case that dealt with it basically was like a woman that barely spoke English that went to go get a payday loan. And like the contract was like 14 pages, and even lawyers were having difficulty understanding what like the interest rate actually was based off of the contract, right? So it's something like that. My question is, does undue influence matter at all here? Does it matter that someone comes of age of 18 and they don't want to live in this system, but they have nowhere to go and they have no financial means of leaving this place? And so in order to gain the rights that other people have, they basically have to sign this contract, or like they can't own property.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of things where, if I want to do X, I have to get to the agreement of others. And, it's a lot like the old Coconut Island analogy, where if I want coconuts and I want to eat, then yeah, I gotta suck the guy's cock. And I agree, yeah, he should be allowed to impose that you have to suck his cock to get those coconuts, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think whatever the term you used was, I don't think it matters in contract law. If you agree to it, you agree to it. If you don't, you don't. Whether you die or not is relevant. Like, I'm not under any sort of criminal penalty. Like, farmers aren't criminalizing me by making it such that I have to give them something in order to get their crops.
Mm-hmm.
But I die if I didn't give them something.
Right.
It's irrelevant, though.
So you think that people will, so long as the contract is explicit, it doesn't matter if a person has no meaningful choice but to sign the contract?
Yeah.
So my question then is, why, like, in what way is this, like, what do you do, right? If the whole world, let's widen the analogy. The whole world is owned by one private property owner that has created a system of government that looks very much the same as America, where there's taxation and where there is, a monopoly on police violence and force, and there's a Supreme Court based off of their constitution, etc., right? And you come of age and they say, well, you can sign this contract or you cannot sign this contract. If you don't sign this contract, you're not allowed to go anywhere in the world. You're not allowed to leave your own private property, and you're also not allowed to own any private property because it's already all owned. So sign the contract and deal with taxation and deal with police brutality and violence, because we also have a monopoly on the justice system. It's an invalid state because it's violating many of your rights. But like, is that the only time that it matters?
I disagree that it's violating your rights, because they, as stipulated, they own the whole world, right? So if I was in that situation, I'd sign the contract.
Right.
Right, and I'd sign the contract, and they'd be just in their contract. There would be nothing unjust occurring.
Mm-hmm.
What would be unjust is if I didn't sign the contract, or if I signed the contract and, you know, broke the rules, or if I didn't sign the contract and stayed.
Right.
That would be unjust.
So what constitutes an invalid contract then, from your position?
If it is not a transfer of title to property, it's not a contract.
So duress and threats of violence to sign a contract are valid contracts?
No, because they're not actually transferring the title to property, because the person is retaining the title to their property.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
They're being taken from them.
Okay, so duress would well then I guess if you're using that and then that has in it baked in things, right? Then can you define from your position what is a proper transfer of title?
So a transfer of title is basically person A is giving up the title to X and allowing person B to take over the title to X. That is a transfer of title, in my view.
But it can't be done under duress, right?
Yeah, no, if it's done under duress, then that is B taking the title of X from A. You know, they're basically just babbling. If they say, yes, please take it from me. Right? They're not actually transferring it. They have been forced to cease their action X to cede it to B. They have not willingly ceded the action X, so B has still caused the conflict over the action X.
Okay, so my intuition, right, is that there's something wrong with this analysis. Maybe I'm wrong, and we've already been over with the intuition being wrong, right? But in the example of a single private property owner owning all property, and right, like, which is obviously kind of an absurd example, right? Obviously, the idea that would occur is astronomically small, because how did one imagine?
It might be the case that you're on a spaceship or something, right?
Right, but that's fair. But the idea that there's nowhere for you to go, and therefore the private property owner sets the rules of every human, right? And can thus say, you know, you could put in your contract, you know, if you don't wear the special hat according to my religion, we blow your brains out. Right? Like, to me, there's a certain level of oppression there and an inability to escape that oppression that I recognize comes from some idea of positive rights that are kind of invalid here, right? But the question is how do we practically live in that world and not revolt?
What you do is you acquiesce, right? There's nothing else to do. You should acquiesce because you're living on somebody else's property.
Right. So, Handmaid's Tale. The women should just be raped by the men because they're more fertile, etc. But they are the private property owner, and there's nowhere you can go. So we just rape the women because they agreed to it.
To be clear, I don't know the specifics of the lore of Handmaid's Tale, so apologies if I err here.
Right.
But assuming that, like, you know, every single segment of land on Earth is owned by a man who wants to have sex with women and doesn't care what they think about it. If the women agree to that, then yeah, it's not rape there. It's
okay.
It's
so
them
let's
agreeing to have sex.
Let's say you disagree. You come of age and you say, "No, I'm not signing this contract." Right? But there's nowhere for you to go.
Then die.
So in this example, the anarchist answer is simply sign the contract that allows men to fuck you whenever they want, and allows you to be chained in the basement and wear these clothes or die.
Yeah.
You don't see that there's like an issue there?
I mean, it might be uncomfortable, but that is the truth. Right? I mean, is it false? Am I incorrect here?
Someone just came in and said this guy with the brown hair gives off a pervert vibe. I appreciate that. I'm a bit of a degen myself. You're right. I am a bit of a pervert. No, I don't think that you're. I don't think that you're.
I like how you're being called the pervert whilst I'm saying die or be raped.
Right. And you're the redhead here. Like, what happened to all of that fucking that hatred and race and that hatred towards redheads? I need that to come back, at least for a little bit. All right, to shift some of the blame. But like, I don't know that like. I don't know. The problem is that it is logically justifiable. And this is, again, the extreme limit case. The same thing with like the magic button, the same thing with the steal a penny to save the world, right? Is that the reality is that you live in a world, right, where we have set the world up, and that the only possible scenario is that women in, you know, that I exclaim, right, they either die or they subject themselves to rape and torture. And then we say there's no moral quandary here. I don't know how you make that argument, because like, to me, that is some form of duress.
I mean, it's clearly not. We know that it's not duress, right?
Well, okay, so if the consequences, if I'm being told, if you don't sign this contract, we're going to put you off somewhere into the ocean and drown you, or we're going to eject you into space where you cannot survive, how is that not duress? How is that not a form of coercion to sign that contract? How does that not invalidate the contract?
Well, it's evictionism, right? You're allowed to evict even if evicting implies killing.
This is true, but no, you're right. Or it's the same as evicting someone into a blizzard, right? From your property.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, you're logically right. And it is the only justifiable.
Right.
And you're right. You're right. But that doesn't mean that there isn't like a deep-seated like problem here. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean that this isn't like the ideal way for anyone to live. I mean, can you at least admit that this isn't an ideal scenario for those women?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely the case that people should not engage in such things. They should not make it such that people are essentially, you know, bound like this. I think that's a bad thing to do. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a bad thing to do to stop them from doing this.
I don't know. This seems like an issue that objectivists are kind of right about when they talk about our inability to win the war, like the philosophical war, if you will, because this feels like an issue of what is occurring with the fact that argumentation ethics only gives us what we ought not do and doesn't give us moral prescriptions. Because intuitively we know that the scenario that we're in feels wrong in some way, and yet we know to stop this is logically untrue. But there's no moral prescriptions in the philosophy of libertarianism, and I feel like this highlights that weakness in some regard.
I completely disagree. I think there are moral prescriptions in libertarianism, like let's just say, well, the NAP, my favorite framing of it, I'll say, is that the NAP is saying that in a given conflict between A and B, if A is the non-aggressor and B is the aggressor, therefore, A ought to win the conflict. This is an ought proposition. It's saying A ought to win the conflict. That is saying what ought happen. And, you know, the argument from argument in general can say a lot more than just the NAP. It can also say, well, we ought engage in truth as opposed to falsehood. We ought engage in life as opposed to death, right? Under certain various different,
right,
you know, limiting factors, right? Because it's not just about maximizing life in general.
Right. No, I mean like we're engaging with the truth here, right? And so like I mean these are there's no way around it, right? Like I agree with you. The problem that I have is that
you're a socialist.
I used to be. The problem that I have, well, it's just maybe, who knows? Deep down in my heart, I am. I think we all are deep down, and then we just have to fight against it because it's untrue. But the fact is that like, how do we deal with the situation that we're now living in an unideal world, right? What do we do to stop that? Like, we can't stop the title exchange, right? We can't stop those things, but how do we prevent that world from coming about? Because I think it is, it would match almost anyone's ideals and goals to prevent that world from coming about, right? And I also think it's ridiculous, right? Because like the analogy, of course, is ridiculous, and we don't really. Oh yeah. Because like there would never be one property owner that imposed such ridiculous situations on everyone, because someone somewhere would have purchased some land without contract stipulations at some point, and there would always be a place to flee to, right? Mm-hmm. And if they prevented you from fleeing to said place, right? Then
they would be forestalling.
Right, they would be right, exactly. And so they would be committing, like, there would be every reason to be able to then use violence to allow those people to escape, right? Like, it would be an inefficient system. It would be an inefficient system. The system itself would likely collapse after a period of while anyways, because from like a Piagetian perspective, you're costing your society so much by having all these forms of oppression that eventually that system is not likely to stand anyways, because people would fight back against that. Like, the reality is not everyone would accept that contract. There would be violence and upheaval regularly, but it's just an interesting thought experiment.
You've basically found my answer to your how would we stop this from occurring. And it's, don't sell your land to this guy. If you know what he's planning and this guy is going to stipulate some fucking crazy shit, don't sell all your land to him, Keep your land. That is my answer.
I was talking to somebody. I don't remember who I was talking to, but it might have been MRH I don't think it was MRH. It was somebody, but we were talking about like or maybe it was, I don't know. I don't remember. And I apologize to whoever it is. If you're here, you can remind me. We were talking about like the idea. Oh, it was a Kano boy, I think. I was talking about the idea of like, what if there's a town, right, where there's a single property owner and they let people come in and like squat on their land, and then like they squat on their land, but like over 1,000 years Las Vegas is built, but there's still one owner and they want to sell Las Vegas. And it was like, so we engaged with that and like how we would work with that, and we had a long discussion about it. But I was just like, ultimately that would never fucking happen. Like, the idea that business after business after business comes in is like, I'm going to build a skyscraper on someone else's land and like not worry about the contract makes no fucking sense, right? Like, eventually there would just be multiple contracts and deal here. There's no way that there would be one single private property owner just passing on this land, and then eventually like, like that, like all of Las Vegas is owned by this one kid that inherited it.
Yeah, that is the thing, is these ethical hypotheticals, they're not applicable necessarily to economics. Right. Because you should not ever expect that all of the land will be owned. We have a huge fucking universe. Like, it's huge. We're not going to ever own all the land. Right.
In my analogy, the amount of time that it will take for one property owner to own all of Earth is going to be less than it takes for us to colonize another planet. Anyways.
Yeah. That's the thing. I right now on stream, I bet $10 trillion US current value in gold. I bet that amount that nobody will ever own all of the land throughout all the universe. I bet that right now. If anybody wants to take me up on that bet, go ahead, right? Because it'll never come to fruition. Right. It's simply not going to occur. And that is the distinction between... That's why anarcho-capitalism is so important in anarchist theory. Because we understand economics and ethics. We understand what is expected to happen and what should happen. We understand both. And this is important, because, you know, these crazy ethical scenarios, very important in testing your principles, but ultimately they are crazy, right?
Right.
Everyone agrees on that.
Yeah, I don't know. So I mean, I think there's like a no. I think I agree with you, right? Like I think the whole magic button question, the world own, you know, save a penny to steal a penny to save the world, and like what do we do if there's one oppressive property owner? All of these things are not really based in reality, right? They're a thought experiment to test your principles, but the problem is that I think the real problem is that they don't match reality. Is the real reason why your intuition is so off on them, right? Is because is that simple fact, is that you'll never be in a situation of save a penny, steal a penny to save the world. You'll never be in a situation where the entire world is a private property owner, and you'll never be in a position where you can end the state magically without violating argumentation ethics in some way, as opposed to gradualism or legalism, whichever you prefer.
That's the thing. I think that's why we need to study these thought experiments, is because, yeah, we don't experience these every day. So you need to study them so that if you experience something a little bit outside of what you normally experience, you will already know what the correct answer is, because you've experienced something way outside of not what you normally experience. That's why we should study these things. So we can constantly expand what we would actually do in terms of, you know, so we can closer map what we would do to what we should do. And we can get it more in line, because that's what we should do. Necessarily, we should get a closer mapping between what we would do and what we should do. We should do that.
So I guess we've had a lengthy conversation on this, and if you still got more time, I guess I would like to delve in a little bit on what we should do or what we ought to do. I'm saying this cheekily, in terms of like strategy, because I think we have there's a big split between a lot of these people about like, should we do things that institute things going closer towards that asymptote, or should we not do those things because they require violations in order to do so?
Sure. So there was this stream the other day on Springtime Nations channel.
Okay.
Where I asked a question similar to this, and you know, I asked it to Tho Bishop.
Yeah, it was Tho Bishop, like, MRH, Springtime Nations, and one other person I can't remember.
Jaeger.
Okay.
Basically, like, you know, the idea is, yes, you should always be ethical, necessarily so. So it is a contradiction to say, well, we should aggress in the meantime so that we can get to an ethical state of affairs. That's a contradiction, so we know it's false. It is a false strategy. So we know that that is not the correct strategy, right? So we should do something which isn't that, the negation of that, which is don't contradict, don't engage in aggression in the meantime, right? That is what we should do.
Yes.
Don't ever engage in aggression.
So let's take this example to, let's say, voting. Is it ever ethical to vote?
Sure.
Okay, interesting. Okay, go ahead.
Basically, I think this might be a Walter Block analogy. Is basically you are a slave on a plantation, and your owner is coming along and he's saying, "Hey, we've got two potential slave drivers for you. Mr. Mean over here, he's gonna torture you every day. And if you ever miss a single bud of cotton, he's gonna really fuck you up, bro." And then we've also got Nanny Nice over here. Nanny Nice, she's gonna be real nice to you. She's gonna, you know, she will really strongly, you know, point their finger at you and be, you know, oh, don't do that again if you don't get enough cotton in a day. But she's not going to hurt you or anything. It would be absolutely ethical and indeed advisable to vote for Nanny Nice over Mr. Mean. If your owner is giving the choice and all the slaves are given the choice and they're having a vote on which one to pick. Another analogy I came up with myself was you're in a bank robbery, right? You're a hostage in a bank robbery, and the bank robbers are like, hey, everyone, we're giving you the choice. You're going to vote right now. Either we're going to shoot you all in the leg, or we're going to shoot you all in the head. It's absolutely advisable and ethical to vote for the shooting in the leg.
So
don't abstain from that vote.
So I think that applies. Here's the issue with that. I agree with you, right? I agree with you. My personal ethic, right, in terms of strategy here is I will only vote for someone if they prove to me that they are going to reduce the size and power of the state in some regard. That's my principle, right? Like, so for example, I voted for Governor Youngkin of Virginia. Why? But there are some ethical quandaries here. But I looked at him and he said, okay, and it wasn't a lesser of two evils situation here. It was this person that's being presented. One of his major things was stopping critical race theory education in public schools, right? And going after that, which I feel like is kind of morally neutral there because like you're using the state to try and fix an already broken system. I don't really care to some regard, but in another regard, like I think that it is better to have less indoctrination towards the most evil ideologies in existence. But the big one that like I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna vote for this guy was he said, look, we have inflation occurring, we have people like prices are going up, and yet we still have a tax in the state of Virginia on groceries at the grocery store. I'm going to abolish grocery store taxes. And I was like, hey, one less tax, the shrinking of the government, financially speaking, in order to make lives easier and have less taxation. That to me is moving in that right direction. However, I also have to accept that Governor Youngkin is a Republican. And there is likely going to be some means of authoritarian state action that he is going to take against other people that I have voted for. And so I don't think that you can vote for a politician and it be really like, if I'm honest with myself, it's not really a morally justifiable position. If you're basically aware that given all the information that you have, that person is likely to use some form of aggression. So what do I do in that scenario? Because in my opinion, it's less. But am I not just engaged in a consequentialist analysis that less aggression is occurring here, but some aggression I am tacitly putting support behind? I would say it's a form of defensive violence because the state already owns me in some regard, and I'm using that defensive power to reduce its own power.
So it's not the same, right? It's you are not the cause of the aggression that the person you vote for will engage in.
Right.
So you are not responsible. So it's not an ethical issue that you vote for person A over person B. So what we need to do here is analyze purely strategically, because we know already it's no ethical issue whoever you vote for, because you aren't the cause of whatever they choose to do. They are the cause of it. So we know no ethical issue at all. You are not committing any crime by voting for person A over person B, no matter who they are, even if person A is Hitler and person B is Ron Paul.
Nicholas Sarwalk has entered the chat.
Oh! Yeah, so no issue at all, ethically, right? But now we need to think strategically. So strategically, you should be voting, and in fact, Springtime of Nations has a great series on this called Libertarian Leninism. You can find it on YouTube just by searching Libertarian Leninism. Brilliant series, best series on strategy that exists on YouTube. So basically, you want to be voting for the person who will most effectively, you're trying to maximize, the most libertarian politician is not necessarily going to get voted in, right?
Right.
The least libertarian politician maybe will. You're looking for the intersection of these two. The most libertarian politician who maybe get voted in, actually, right? You're voting for them. Even if they don't win, you're still moving the legislator towards libertarianism. Because they're going to be paying attention to who's getting voted for, and they're going to at least be paying mouth service to it. So, if somebody is saying, hey, my campaign is all about legalizing magic mushrooms.
Real quick, people are asking in chat, Libertarian Leninism is talking about, like, probably dual power or, dual power theory.
I'm talking about Lenin's strategy.
Yeah,
so,
which disregard stage 3, because stage 3 is fucking evil, but in terms of dual power theory, stage 1 and 2 are good.
Basically, Libertarian Leninism is about taking Lenin's political strategy, because Lenin was very, very successful in his political strategy. He took over all of Russia from a minority of the political power. He was a very, very small party he ran, and he was able to take over all of Russia because of his maneuverings.
Right.
So everybody, after you watch this debate, go and watch Libertarian Leninism. I'm going to go back in the future and put in a card to Libertarian Leninism here.
This isn't a debate. Very good series. I'm not telling this. We're having a conversation.
It's a conversation, whatever, yeah.
I hate that shit. I'm not in debate bro mode, and I don't think you are either.
That's why I've been drinking.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I will say this, though, just to be fair, you should read Lenin's dual power theory, but you should absolutely disregard stage 3. I think stage 3 is pure evil. Right? Which is
stage 3 where he says, like, then you fucking kill everyone.
No, stage 3 is after you've given class consciousness to, like, infiltrate the bureaucracy with the ideology, and then use the bureaucracy, like, against the system itself. I don't think that's a path towards, like, destruction and not a path towards legalization.
Well, if you are infiltrating bureaucracy, that seems like what the Austrians are currently doing to make the Mises Institute work, right?
Yeah, maybe. Another thing that I want to point out too, when you said, like, voting for the most likely, but also the most libertarian likely to win candidate, I think that despite the fact that I did a whole fucking 2-part fucking video series on YouTube of our live stream on Karlin Borsenko and the evil bitch that she is, set that aside. I think LPNH has shown to some regard that voting for a hardcore libertarian pushes the parties towards those as well. So I don't think you necessarily have to vote for, let's say, the GOP candidate that's kind of libertarian. You can vote for the libertarian candidate. And what has happened in New Hampshire is many of the Republicans have become paleo-libertarians because they know because they know a certain percentage will only vote for them if they're paleo-libertarian because of the strong libertarian bent. And so you as an individual can push the Libertarian Party and know that what you often are doing is pushing the other parties to be more libertarian in the hopes that they can win your vote or win others' votes. So I don't think you necessarily need to vote for a viable candidate that is more libertarian. I think you can vote for an unviable candidate that's libertarian as a means of sending a message. Another thing you can do is you can write in Ron Paul or something. Like, they look at this shit and they go, okay, this is somebody that might vote for me because they go to the polls and they do vote, but they're dissatisfied with me because I'm not libertarian enough.
I should be clear. In the Springtime of Nations videos I mentioned in the second part, in fact, they do give you, like, a full, like, flow chart of how you should vote given the circumstances, right? So it is definitely the most often thing that you should vote for is the Libertarian Party. And, there are various different circumstances where maybe you don't vote for them or, whatever. And one of them is, writing Ron Paul. you should in fact even talk to Adrian from Springtime of Nations. He's very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, you.
I'll get with MRH. I'll get with MRH, or if you want to like introduce me in a Discord or something, so I can actually talk to him.
I can link you his Discord.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. All right. Appreciate it.
But yeah, firstly, I need to take another piss.
Yeah, well, it's because you've drank like 7 beers so far.
This proves I'm not in debate bro mode.
Right? Yeah. So, guys, we'll 2 things. I taught sorry, not springtime. Short Fat Otaku apparently made 2 15-minute like summary videos on his channel. He doesn't want me to react to his larger video. I guess because I don't know. But I will respect his wishes there and just react to his 2 15 minutes, which ultimately means instead of reacting to like the first hour and spending a couple hours talking about it, it'll probably be a shorter section. So after I'm done talking to LiquidZulu, if you guys want to hop in our Discord in like the live stream waiting room, we can definitely have further conversation, because I'm treating today like a nerdy day. Like we're just having like nerd wars and nerd discussions. So if you want to talk about some of the things that we're talking about and critique me or critique LiquidZulu or whatever, afterwards, like, hop in the live stream waiting room once we're done, and Mark and I will talk for a minute, and we'll bring you in for a little bit if you want to have that conversation before we move forward. Watch Andrew Wilson debate a bunch of Wignats, and they couldn't define white to him coherently because they never heard of Bayes. I almost pitied them. Like they couldn't do a Bayesian, is that how you say it, analysis? I'll critique Kenobi. I'll tell you what. I mean, I think on our BitChute, our Rumble, we still have like the first 2 episodes of our reaction to Kenobi. I was losing my shit angry at that fucking show. But we just stopped doing the reactions because they weren't popular, and also because like it was just, I didn't want to do them. It was so cringe. But we will definitely get into it like for a while, even with those 2 15-minute videos. All right. Potty breaks over. So you do believe in voting as a form of, would you classify it as like defensive violence at that point? That's the term that I would use. Like, would you use a different term to encapsulate that opinion?
I don't even think it's violence. I think it's just, you're just writing a fucking letter in a box or whatever, right? I don't think it's violence. I don't think it's anything. I think it's just advisable. So
you think because you're not actually morally responsible for the, by contributing to putting someone in power, you're not necessarily responsible for their actions. Otherwise, that's like just a consequentialist analysis of outcomes. And so it doesn't actually, there's no objective means of being able to punish you because someone else did unethical things, even if you supported them in gaining said power.
Yeah, it's a lot like, I use this analogy against Casimir, in fact. Basically, imagine you're walking on the road and you see a man about to murder the Beatles, and you prevent this murder from occurring, and then but then they go on ahead and write Helter Skelter, and this convinces Marilyn Manson, or the other Manson, of
Charles
going
Manson.
on a murder. Charles Manson, that's the one.
Charles Manson never murdered anybody.
Yeah. So it convinces Charles Manson to go on a murder spree. So, Beatles, you save them, and then they go on to do something which convinces Charles Manson of murdering people. Right? You are not responsible for those murders. Just because you vote someone in,
right,
and then they go ahead and choose to murder someone or commit some other aggression, that does not mean you're responsible for that aggression.
Another trick. I'm using you as a springboard for all of the tricky questions at this point, because this is why you need. This is, again, I'm stealing it from Casimir. He said it once, like kind of casually, and I was like, no, I'm using that because it's true. This is why I call LiquidZulu like a compass, right? He always points to true north, and sometimes we walk into a wall And it's like, I don't know, maybe we should be going east or west because there's a wall. And LiquidZulu is like, no, you do everything you can to climb said wall, even if it takes longer, because you must always go north. But, you know, and so like, you know, so I think there's sometimes some disagreement that I have, but I respect the ability to test things to their limits as the compass that you are. Suicide. If someone is about to commit suicide, do you think it is an act of aggression to physically stop them from doing so?
Yes, unless you have the property rights to stop them. Like, you know, if you own a bridge and the bridge says, hey, if you try and commit suicide, the rules are that we can stop you, right? Then that's fine. But if they're just like in some cliff out in the wild or whatever, and they're trying to commit suicide, no, you're not allowed to stop them. You're not allowed to stop them. People are allowed to commit suicide.
So interesting. So you would say, like, if I'm on, so I'm on someone else's property, right? And there's no rules about suicide or whatever that are explicitly written by contract on property. So someone owns, let's say, a national forest, right? And like, you know, there's $2 ticket entry fee to go camp out in the woods or do whatever you want. And I'm camping and I come across a man that's about to commit suicide on a cliff. I would owe him restitution in some regard if I were to grab him and stop him from committing suicide.
Yes, you've committed a crime, so you'd owe him restitution and he could retribute.
Okay, but my just dealing with like, I get that argument. It sounds right. Could I not make the argument, right, that the person that is in suicide, that is suicidal, right, that is willing to make an anti-life decision, is not in the state of mind to be able to make that decision, because they're no longer competent to be able to consent, because they're about to end their life and obviously are having some mental anxiety or anguish that is so difficult that they're not able to make rational decisions. And that what I am actually doing is that I am taking over temporary guardianship of that individual because of their mental instability, as a bystander. And then I am assuming that there is a need to take over guardianship of this person. And like later, if they're like, you know, seen to be of sound mind and body, and that's their rational choice, then I wouldn't be able to violate it. Because that's how I would approach that situation.
Well, the thing is, like, you know, where the fuck do we stop with this, right? If we're just going to be assuming that people who want to die are in non-sound body, why won't you assume that people who want to buy blue shirts as opposed to red shirts, they must be insane. So I must take possession of them and, you know, prevent them from doing this insane mistake, right? It's
right.
There is no logical basis for why death over life is an invalid valuation as opposed to any other valuation, at least in economics and, you know, law. In ethics outside of law, certainly they're making a mistake. They're doing something bad.
Right.
But that doesn't imply that you're allowed to stop them from doing that bad thing.
I don't know. I still believe I'm right on this one, right? I still believe that, like, if someone is making a decision that on its face appears to be something that is so irrational that it leads to the permanent consequence of death, I don't know that there's something legally wrong with attempting to stop them under the assumption, right? Because we made this kind of approximation earlier where we said that you have to make decisions based off of the best available knowledge that you have, right? And seeing a stranger about to commit suicide, the assumption based off of all of the knowledge that I have is that this person is in some form of mental anguish that, like, has led them to a state of not being able to consent, and I'm taking over guardianship to protect them.
I will be clear that was my friend Nye's position on it. So, you know, that's not necessarily my position on it. I take the God's eye view. So I don't agree that ever it is the case that you're allowed to engage in this. I don't think virtuous aggression is a thing, essentially. I don't think it's ever the case that you should aggress and I think it is aggression to prevent a person from using their own body in whatever way they want. And if they want to use their body to, you know, pummel a bullet into their heart or into their brain, that is their business.
Is it a form
I'll
of...
try and stop them.
But hear me out.
Not aggressively.
Right. Like, what if... Is it a form of aggression, for example, if you find a baby abandoned on the street, to pick up the baby and take it home and feed it, and then try and find out who the rightful owner is? Right? So my approximation is that when I find someone suicidal and, you know, let's say I attempt a dialogue with them and they just scream, "Leave me alone, I'm killing myself." Right? They don't give me any moral justification. Like, there's no, I have no other information other than the fact that they scream that they're going to kill themselves. Right? So, like, we're not able to have like a rational conversation in any regard. I don't think that it's an act of aggression to assume that this person is unable to consent because they are in a state of mind, much like a mentally challenged person that I find lost in the woods, right? If I find someone with like severe Down syndrome alone in the woods, it doesn't matter that they're 25 years old or they appear to be in their 20s, right? This is a person that can't take care of themselves. And I think definitionally someone that I have no information as to why they are attempting suicide, but it looks like, but they're saying they're about to commit suicide, and all the information shows that, and they're not giving me a justification that this person is incapable of consent because they are in a situation where they are so mentally distraught that they just as easily could be committed to a mental institution. Like, I wouldn't trust them to sign a contract in that moment, right? So why would I trust them to, why can't I assume guardianship of that person?
So the thing with guardianship is if the person has the maybe potential for argument, but they're not currently able to argue, that is when they're a latent self-owner. That is when they are able to have guardianship over them. But just because a person doesn't give you a moral justification for something does not imply that they are not currently capable of arguing. They may well be currently capable of arguing.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I could be standing on a bridge and saying, yeah, no, I want to kill myself because I hate life, right? And I could be perfectly capable of holding an argument with you, and I say, yeah, no, fuck you. I want to die right now.
Right, like it's not any value to me to have that argument, right? I agree, but what I mean to say is, like, you can't sign is a contract valid if you're drunk? I mean, utterly shit-faced, blackout drunk.
If you are not capable of argumentation, then it's not valid.
Okay, but you're blackout drunk, but like you're capable of speaking to some degree. Therefore, the contract is valid.
Capable of uttering sounds is not the
fair enough. You're able to say, "I like blue cheese because blue cheese tastes good to me."
This is getting into basically the philosophy of language, right? What counts as an argumentation? So basically, if you are able to engage in true propositional exchange,
right,
then yeah, argumentation ethics applies. But you know, when it is the case, you know, actually finding out whether somebody is able to engage in argumentation, that's challenging. Because that's an empirical matter.
Like, it doesn't matter if you've had one beer, because like you still have all of the mental faculties to be able to tell whether or not your actions, the things that you engage in and speak in and argue, are valid or invalid claims.
Yeah, assuming that they're not like a super lightweight or whatever. Okay,
but if they were... Yeah. But if they were utterly shit-faced drunk and all they can do is argue sound. So you're saying that the suicidal person is of enough sound and mind and body to engage in argumentation. We must assume that as the default when coming across someone.
Well, they might be. They might be of enough sound mind.
What if I assume that they're incapable of doing so? Because they're about to commit suicide. They refuse to engage in argumentation with me, and all I know is that this person is so utterly distraught that they're willing to commit to killing themselves as an anti-life position.
What if I assume that you're so mentally ill that you disagree with me, that you must be insane.
Right.
Therefore, I can, you know, take you as a guardian, under my guardianship, rather.
But I'm making the arguments. I'm making argumentation towards you, so you can't assume that anymore. I'm engaging in a scenario where a person
I'm not listening.
No, but I'm engaging.
Listening.
I'm engaging in a situation, right, where someone refuses argumentation. Right. Which
Right.
is,
Imagine if I had refused argumentation with you, and instead just kidnapped you and said, "No, this guy, he can't argue. He's insane."
right. But I'm not preventing you. You would have to prevent me from arguing, right? So if you came up to me, you could assume, you could logically assume, right, that everyone is incapable of argumentation until they argue against you, right? And the answer to that would be, you know, you're no longer committing aggression if you assault people on a regular basis until they argue against you, would be like obviously untrue, right? So if we apply that logic here, the suicidal person, just because they refuse to engage in argumentation with me doesn't mean that I get to assume that they're not. What I'm saying though is that there's a difference between those two, which is that not only are they refusing argumentation, but they're actively engaging in behavior that leads me to rationally believe that this person has lost the fucking plot, right? You know what I mean? Like if I find someone in a bikini, I find a dude in a bikini dancing in the middle of the street, right? And I'm like, "Hey dude, what are you doing?" And then, you know, he goes, fuck off, and just starts dancing in the middle of the street. I might assume guardianship of this person, be like, "Hey buddy, come here. You're being crazy. You're engaged in something that may potentially be an issue to everyone else involved here. Like, are you okay?" Like, I might step in because this person seems to be mentally crazy, and I feel morally obligated, not necessarily through libertarian philosophy, but personally, to try and help this person.
Right, but the problem here is that this is just basically a personal preference. You have a personal preference against people, you know, committing suicide and dancing in the street naked, right? This is a personal preference that you're applying to philosophy, which is invalid, right? You cannot apply these personal preferences to philosophy. So you need to derive, well, is it valid in this case to, you know,
to assume guardianship without knowing 100% for a fact that they're mentally incompetent?
There's always going to be uncertainty, right?
Right.
You can't know.
That's the issue, right? Is that because there's always going to be uncertainty, I'm looking at an individual that to the best of my knowledge and reason is someone that is mentally deranged in some aspect.
Right, and I might think, well, I actually do think that all communists are mentally deranged.
Right.
That doesn't mean I have a right to, you know, enslave them.
I'm not enslaving the person. I'm stopping them from committing an act of self-harm and taking over temporary guardianship until they're able to adequately engage in argumentation with me. And then
I
I'm
think communism is a big act of self-harm. I think, you know, people being communists is insane. Well,
in their mind, it is potentially, but I'm talking about an action, right? Like I'm taking over guardianship from until they're able to engage in some form of argumentation with me.
I mean, when Vosh speaks as communism, that's an action.
Yeah,
insane.
I mean, yeah, fair enough. Like the very principle of argumentation ethics is the act of speaking is an action, right? Yeah, I don't know. I think I just disagree here. I think that what I am doing is not an act of aggression because all of the available evidence leads me to believe that this person is incapable of making sound decisions and that it's no longer aggressive for me to temporarily take over guardianship as a means of protecting them until they're willing to engage in some form of rational argumentation with me.
What's the limiting factor here? Like, why can't you just go up to anybody and say, "Hey, that person looks insane to me," and then take guardianship over them?
Yeah, I mean, well, like I said, The issue is the difference between that person looks insane towards that person is doing something that is like, I would say that that's an unreasonable thing, right? Like if I see someone with a crazy hair, it's not reasonable for me to assume that that person's insane and needs temporary guardianship. But if I see someone about to commit suicide, then I think it's reasonable to expect that person is insane in some regard.
But that's just your thoughts, right? So how are you actually deriving these thoughts?
Okay, well let me go back then, right? I'm because it's an anti-life position. But let me use another analogy then. Am I allowed to stop someone from stabbing another person to death?
Yes.
But how do I know that both of these parties didn't consent to it? How do I know that this person doesn't want to be stabbed? How do I know that this person isn't Doug Marcaida and he's not actually going to stab him to death, but in fact, he's going to stab them in ways that's really not going to kill them. And this person has a really big pain kink and is also like an exhibitionist. And like they get their fucking pussy dripping wet, getting stabbed in non-fatal ways in public. And everyone involved is a consenting adult. I don't know. But it's reasonable for me to step in and stop it, and it's not a form of aggression.
So it's fine to stab someone in a consensual manner, right? But it's not fine necessarily to stop someone from killing themselves when they want to, because that is consensual as well.
So what you're saying is because another party is involved, you're unwilling to determine consent, but with suicide, you're more likely to understand that consent is there. You're just not aware of whether or not they're able to consent to the actions that they're doing.
Whether you're able or not is, beside the point, because that's an empirical matter. Whether you can determine whether something is aggression or not, that's an empirical matter. You don't know that a priori, right? You do know a priori, given that somebody does want to kill themselves, it's aggression to stop them from killing themselves, because they own their body.
Right, but you don't know whether or not they're mentally fit to do so, and you have evidence to the contrary, which is the very act of wanting to kill yourself.
The thing is, if they weren't fit to do so, if they weren't mentally fit to do so, they necessarily do not want to kill themselves. Their will is unknown, essentially.
So
it's fine to preserve an unknown will, but if the will is known, it's not fine to subvert that will and prevent them from doing what they want.
Could you stop someone from killing themselves in a well, no, I mean, that wouldn't matter. Never mind. I'm not even going in that down that road. But like, so what you're saying is if someone is attempting suicide, then what if they're blackout drunk?
They're still acting, right? I mean, we would still say that if someone was blackout drunk and they killed someone, if I was really, really drunk, crazy to imagine, I know. If I was really, really drunk and I just walked up to your front door, knocked on it, and you opened it, and I shot you twice, right? Killed you. I'm still responsible for that shit, right? So you're still responsible for your actions while you're drunk.
Okay. Yes. Presumably, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like unless of course you were drugged. Right? Because
if you were drugged and if you were drugged by some crazy drug where the mafia could just say, hey, do this, that, and the other thing, and then you would do it. Like there are drugs which do that. Right,
because the consequence, the action that you're really responsible for is well, you're responsible for all of your actions, but to say, well, I wasn't of sound mind then, it's like, well, you were of sound mind when you decided to get shit-faced drunk. You made the choice to do that. Even if you were in a position where you didn't understand what was going on later, you were in a position where you were sober at one point and you made the decision to make yourself unknowably fucking like crazy intentionally. And so you're responsible for what you do during that time because of the fact that you made yourself be in that position. But if you don't make yourself be in that position, then I don't know that you could necessarily then blame them for the things done while you were no longer of sound mind and body.
Well, there are drugs which exist where, like, you know, it's just some powder which the cartel comes up and blows it in your face, and then suddenly you are susceptible to any suggestion. If they just say, hey, go over to the ATM there and withdraw all your money, you'll just go there. Like,
or just like you could be dosed or something with like crocodile or PCP or something, right? Like Training Day, right? In Training Day, where he's like he makes him smoke weed and then he realizes that he's done PCP, angel dust, right? And PCP, angel dust, makes you do crazy things. And he was under the assumption that he was smoking weed. If he had done something crazy under PCP, I don't know that he would necessarily be directly liable for those things, because someone gave him a substance other than what he thought it was and was no longer in a state to not act violently.
That's legitimate because he was defrauded, essentially.
Right. He was defrauded. So I don't know. I still think that I find the argument unconvincing on this one issue. Which is I think we're mostly in agreement on everything. In this one issue of suicidality and coming across a stranger that refuses argumentation, that is attempting suicide, I don't think it is an act of aggression to stop them under the assumption that you're taking over temporary guardianship of someone that's acting irrationally to the point of taking their own life.
You are assuming, though, that they are under some other influence.
Right.
That is not always the case. There are people who commit suicide who are not under any influence.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
And so it would be unjust to stop them from committing suicide.
I still don't think of it as I don't see how it's an act of aggression. I mean, I guess maybe because I'm thinking of aggression as intentionality in a state of mind, and I'm forgetting, the accidental criminal, right? I'm maybe for whatever reason, my like intuition is keeping me from accepting that you can accidentally be a criminal. And so I think this is another scenario where you're right, technically speaking, that it is an act of aggression, but that you shouldn't argue to do that, and that you shouldn't do that, but also arbitration and courts and society will likely not punish you in some regard, right? Like, you know what I mean?
They should punish you,
but they probably won't.
Yeah, probably won't. There's many things that they probably won't punish you for right now, but they should. Right? If you have stopped a person from
killing
suicide,
themselves, right?
Committing suicide, yeah. They should punish you for that. You should be punished for that because you've committed aggression. It may be the case that you don't get punished for that, but you should be, because you've committed a crime, right there.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know because, to me, someone that is committing suicide is not of sound mind, period, to be honest. If I had to be honest about it, right? Because this is an inherently anti-life position. I don't think that there's ever like an acceptable rational means or argument that you can make to commit suicide.
I mean, like, if we're just going to take anti-life positions as being completely, they're not capable of anything, right?
But the problem is you could apply that to drug usage or anything.
Yeah. We just have complete like objectivist authoritarianism, essentially.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it. I'll have to think about it, like, and maybe like map it out on logic tree or something. You know what I mean? And like really delve into it. But like, I'm still not fully convinced on this regard. I think someone is still acting in a rational, non-aggressive means when they stop someone from committing suicide based off of the idea that this person is like crazy and they're trying to save them. I think it's the same. I think it would be the same scenario as the knife stabbing that I talked about, right? Like if I was in public and I saw someone stabbing someone, I would assume that this is an act of aggression, and I would assume, you know, that this person, that consent isn't involved here, and I would try and stop them. And I wouldn't, even though it would necessarily be an act of aggression. If I stop someone from stabbing another person, not knowing that the act is actually consensual, because the person is a knife expert and like an anatomy expert, and the other person has a pain kink and a voyeurism kink, right? Or not voyeurism, exhibitionist kink, and it's perfectly legitimate and consensual. I am committing an act of aggression against this person by stopping them from stabbing this other person, especially if I assault them in the process, right? And yet, I think it's perfectly reasonable and not a form of aggression to do that, because all of the available information that I have at the time leads me to believe that I am saving someone from an act of aggression. And so I think what this means is, if we follow this through to its logical conclusion, no person could ever stop someone from violently harming another person without it being considered an act of aggression.
Not necessarily. There's always uncertainty. With every action, you might be aggressing against someone. And if you have, then, you know, you should recognize that fact. And you should be like, oh shit, my bad, sorry. We should not seek out these acts of aggression. Definitely not. Because you've done something you shouldn't have done. Right,
but if that's it, and that's fine, right? Like that's fine with like recognizing later that you're technically a criminal, right? The issue that I have with that is that, based upon the logic that you're using, where we must always we ought to act in the least aggressive manner possible, right? Then by your definition, we ought to never intervene when violence is occurring between two people. That we ought to allow all violence to occur and all forms of aggression done by other people to other people, because we may be engaging in an act of aggression because that violence may be consensual.
Well, no, that's the case of every single action, right? It's the case of every single action that it might be the case that you are aggressing.
Right. I would say the same thing about the suicide.
You were always dealing with uncertainty. But you have to act. You necessarily have to act. So you have to deal with uncertainty.
Right. And so my what I'm saying is that I have to act. And when I see someone randomly that refuses any argumentation, about to commit suicide, attempting suicide, like they're about to jump off a cliff, I have to assume that this is an unreasonable, crazy person. That is because all of the available evidence shows that they're an unreasonable, crazy person. They won't talk to me, they won't argue with me, and they're about to murder themselves, right? They're about to suicide. They are clearly, as far as I can tell from the information given to me, in a situation where they're unable to consent to ending their own life. Now, if I later discover that I calm them down, they talk to me, they say, look, my mom just died of cancer, my wife left me, everything in my life is shit, I have nothing going on, and like it is my sound, I've thought about this for 3 months, right? I've been to therapy, like I'm committed, this is what I want to do. These are all of my arguments. I can articulate them well and say that this is what I prefer as an individual. And then I continue to kidnap them, right? That's an act of aggression for sure. But in the original, I don't know that it is.
The thing is, I don't think it's, I don't think they ever could articulate properly, i.e. in total adherence to truth, that they should kill themselves, because that's a contradiction.
Right.
Right. That's always going to be a contradiction. But that doesn't imply that other people are allowed to stop them from this contradiction. Because they own their bodies. So therefore, they're allowed to end their bodies.
Okay.
Yeah, but they shouldn't do it. And absolutely, they should not do it. But they're allowed to do it. Other people should not stop them from doing it.
So let's think about this for a second. So people are allowed to kill themselves, And there's no argument against why they're not allowed to do so, regardless of like in any scenario. And yet there is argument of violence towards another where there are times where that is not allowed. Usually most of the time, right? Like it's usually violence against another person is not consensual. And so you're saying that it is morally justified to step in that, despite having the information available of whether or not the violence is consensual, but it's not justifiable to step in towards the suicide, at least in a form of aggression. What is only acceptable is to like maybe talk them off the edge or something like that, like some form of non-aggression.
Yeah. You're allowed to talk them off all you want, but you're not allowed to prevent them from using their body however they want.
To chat and everyone listening, I'm not saying that it's that the justification comes from their ability to articulate why they commit suicide. I was just giving that as like how the conversation would go, proving that they're capable of making arguments. They're capable of argumentation. Like they could argue about like some other philosophical shit. It wouldn't matter. Like I don't mean that like they need to be able to justify their suicide as a test. I just mean they need to be able to argue. A bunch of people were like, that's not a test. I was just clearing that up. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think about it. I mean, that's a compelling argument. I don't know. I feel like it's another one of those scenarios where I probably would do it if presented the situation, even if it was wrong.
You should.
But I don't know that I should. I don't know that I should. I'll have to think about it. Yeah. I don't know if there's any more limit cases, LiquidZulu. I think I've found all of the limit cases. Like, I don't think there's anything else we would disagree on, right? Because I think like a majority of the basics, we're both AnCaps here.
Yeah.
You say yeah, because you just want to say I'm not an AnCap, but this purity testing bullshit's got to go. I agree, purity testing is good, right? But I do have like a slight bone to pick with you, where like the Twitter space is just not a good spot for it, man. I don't think it's a good strategy for libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism when you're dealing with other people that you know are AnCaps or at the very least close to it and have some issues with their thinking, and then like you utilize that to like publicly attack them and try and get them in traps to then be like, this is why this person's a bad faith actor that needs to be, you know, excised from the movement. I don't think that's a good way to do shit. I think it's kind of shitty.
I completely disagree. I think we should be entirely engaged, for the most part, in excising any sort of, you know, falsehoods from the movement. And, you know, if people do not acquiesce to this attack, then they should, you know, be removed. And I have this position because of, you know, David Friedman. He is widely seen as an AnCap.
He's not.
But he's not an AnCap.
At all.
He's absolutely not an AnCap.
Right.
And he should be attacked for not being an AnCap.
Well, he should just be called a market anarchist.
Certainly, yeah. Whatever he wants to fucking call himself, whatever, yeah. But not an AnCap. He's not an AnCap. He rejects praxeology as the correct theory of ethics and economics. And we should be shrinking the tent.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people want to expand
big tent
the tent
liberal,
out.
yeah.
A lot of people want to expand the tent out to just fucking everybody who's even tangentially aligned with us. No. Shrink the fucking tent right down. Shrink it right down to those who are useful. And, you know, engage in these purity tests all the time to see if someone is useful. To see if they can withstand the purity test and should be taken within the tent. That is what I'm doing.
I understand that, and I find it somewhat rational. The issue that I have with it is that it doesn't come off like that's your strategy at all. It doesn't come off like you're trying to make anarcho-capitalism like better, or that the speakers are pure. It comes off more like what you're doing is engaging in like clout chasing and drama for the sake of riling up people and attention. And maybe it's just and I don't want to say that is what you're doing, right? But I do want to say that like I think it also works against being able to purify or cleanse people that are legitimate actors, right? Like would you say that I'm an illegitimate person as far as attempting to espouse and become and harden my ideas of anarcho-capitalism? You think I'm a bad faith actor attempting to infiltrate anarcho-capitalism and subvert it in some way?
Well, given your responses today, no. But that is exactly what I have been given, considering I tried to give you this test. Right? That is the point.
Right.
The point is that I am trying to weed out these bad actors and weed out people who are not worthy of being part of the movement.
Right.
That is the entire point.
But you're weeding. I think what you're doing is you're weeding out neophytes and pushing them away. That's not good for the movement, right? If someone is a neophyte and they're confused in their thinking or their rationality, right? Like 6 months ago, I didn't understand argumentation ethics at all. I just did not fucking get it. And even today, I struggle really fully grasping it, right? And this is having done a lot of work trying to understand it, trying to get better at it, and things of that nature. Now, but if you're engaging in the purity test to say, oh, you're not this thing, you're definitionally true. But I don't know that it's in any way good for the movement or in any way, shape, or form good for proselytization if you're engaging with fellow travelers, attempting to learn and attempting to get better by trying your best to excise them and trying to use traps, right? To find out the flaws and then blowing those flaws up for the world to see, to embarrass and shun them. It seems like you're actively engaging in trying to move people away from libertarianism. It seems like you're trying to destroy the movement, not build it.
Well, the thing you have to recognize is when I am engaging with people, I'm not engaging with them. I'm engaging with the audience. And the audience is all I care about. I'm trying to grow the audience for anarcho-capitalism, not trying to bring individual people into it.
Well, but if that were true, I have an audience, right? And so if you push me out, then you also push out my audience.
Not necessarily, because if I dominate you in a given debate, then maybe your audience shifts over to me.
Right. Or maybe they follow me. I mean, like most of my audience, for example, is not anarcho-capitalist, right? Like most of my audience is paleo-lib, constitutional conservative.
And then if they are irrelevant to my goals, if they don't understand the arguments I'm making, then I don't care about them. They are sheeple, right? They are just going to be herded away by whoever, right? But if they're not going to be herded away by whoever, and instead they are going to be drawn by correct argumentation, then I'm just going to make correct argumentation all the time. That is all that I care about. The set of people who will be drawn by correct argumentation, the set of the potential vanguard, that is who I care about. I don't care about people who are outside of that set.
So do you believe like the objectivists that like you only need a few philosophers and that like the overwhelming majority of humans can have no understanding of libertarian philosophy and we can still like have anarcho-capitalism one day, even if 99% of people don't understand the shit at all?
Potentially, yes. But I would like the maximum amount of people in the vanguard. That is what I want. Maximum amount of people in the vanguard. So I'm not going for people outside the vanguard.
Yeah, I think that might actually be our potential. I think that's the real disagreement here. Is that I think that in order for it to survive, there needs to be a large minority at the very least of people that understand libertarianism to some degree, and that we need to like that we'll never be able to have a successful, world of anarcho-capitalism, because that's eventually what I want to see, right? Unless a large swath of the population. I don't think it needs to be 100% or anything, right? but like at least like I'm pulling a number out of my ass. Recognize that I don't know the number because I don't have a crystal ball and I don't have anywhere near enough information. But let's just say like 25% of the population needs to, in some form or way, like agree with the non-aggression principle, and like maybe not understand what it means.
I agree for the most part, right? I agree that you need some critical mass to resist state aggression in order for state aggression to be overturned.
Right.
But the way you get there is not by convincing this general population, because the general population is fucking retarded. They don't understand anything.
All right.
That is
I have to like interrupt for a moment and say, like, please don't say the R word. I apologize to Twitch and whatever terms of service, etc. Continue.
Okay, yeah.
I'm on Twitch.
So you are not trying to advocate towards this mass of the general population.
Mm-hmm.
You are trying to advocate towards the thought leaders. People who are actually leading the population.
Mm-hmm.
This is who you are advocating towards. You don't care about the sheep people. They don't matter because they can just be herded away to any old direction. You care only about the actual vanguard of your movement. The people who are striking at the roots as opposed to the branches of the tree of statism. That is who you are targeting. You're targeting the people who could potentially strike at the roots.
Ooh,
that is who you care about.
That's I feel like you just invalidated your entire position by saying the people who could potentially. Because the problem is that, yeah, there's plenty of people that are sheep, right? But once you admit that the individual that is potential ally, but not quite there, and then you engage in behavior to excise them because they're not there yet, then you've kind of invalidated your position by saying that we will excise and embarrass and force out anybody that does not have perfect reasoning in this regard.
The thing is, I think this excising and embarrassment of people who are not in accordance, with true liberty, who are not adhering to libertarianism, I think this discourages people from leaving libertarianism. If I am constantly going about really embarrassing people in debates who are leaving libertarianism, who are not libertarians, etc., this really makes people not want to leave libertarianism. This is the psychological effect of, if people who are leaving libertarianism, people who are not libertarians, if they're constantly getting embarrassed in debates, people don't want to join that group. This is simply the case.
Yeah, I think that's just a fundamental misunderstanding of psychology at that point. That's just not how people are. People are not... We like to think of ourselves as rational creatures, and we are because we have the capacity for reason. But
so you don't want to join fucking people who are getting embarrassed.
That's just not how that works, though, right? If you can see any debate that I do with like lefties, right? The overwhelming majority of the audience, no matter how much you embarrass them, right? They have their positions emotionally speaking,
but
and
what
then
is the
logic,
factual?
the logic is superseded by emotional reasoning. In humans, the overwhelming majority of humans have an emotional position that they believe, right? And once you start, if you embarrass them, right, and you attack them and make them look like an idiot, they shut off their reason and they go back to their position. They call you stupid and they say you're dumb and they dismiss you completely.
In general. Yeah.
This is true of the audience as well.
If you're, making it such that position A is always getting embarrassed in debates and always makes you an embarrassing person, you're going to be less likely to want to adhere to that position because you don't want to get embarrassed.
Well, I disagree. Like, let's say Marxism, for example, you can attack a Marxist over and over and over again, and all it does is feed further into the audience's beliefs of Marxism as something that is as something that is being attacked, and that there are victims of like the evil individuals because they've already moralized you and your position as evil.
These people are irrelevant, though. These people are simply irrelevant to our goals because they
disagree.
are sheep.
Sheep can be herded.
Oh, okay, go ahead and herd, and they'll just be herded away from you.
I don't think that's true. I don't think I understand your logic.
Vanguard. You're looking for a vanguard. You're not looking for a herd of sheep. You're looking for a vanguard. A vanguard of people who can actually make a difference. Not a bunch of fucking sheep who you have to constantly herd to make sure they aren't being herded away. That is not what you're looking for. You're looking for people who are actually thinking for themselves and can actually do something. That is what you're looking for when you're libertarian.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're wrong here. I don't know that a vanguard is going to be enough. It worked for the communists, but that's because they were willing to engage in violence. That minority opinion is helpful in that, but eventually you have to convince the sheep. The sheep have to be convinced, unless you're willing to use violence to overthrow the system that the sheep support, which is statism.
The sheep are convinced simply by, this is what our leaders are saying. Okay, then we'll go with it. The sheep don't give a shit about philosophy. If you take over and you say, okay, this is the way things are now, the sheep are like, okay, good. Don't care, right? The sheep don't care.
When you attack people, you close off their reasoning, but you're saying that that's okay because you want to purity test a vanguard, right? You want a small elite group of people that are capable of actually being principled in these positions, so that they're not watered down, so the ideas aren't communicated ineffectively, right? Which I understand that philosophy, right? Because when I go out and the world wants to know what is libertarianism, they think of naked people dancing. They think of, what do we need a license for our toasters? They think of Bill Weld and what is Aleppo, right? Like, these are the things that the sheep see of libertarianism. And this is because we have not purity tested libertarianism. It is because we've allowed this big tent philosophy. I agree with all of those things. The issue that I have is that when you have close allies with the potential of becoming the vanguard, if you will, to communicate the message effectively, so that one day the sheep will come around because the systems in their life have been changed by the effects of libertarianism. They just go along with the herd. You know what I mean? Like, when something is brought to the market, they go, this is better because it is, and their life is better, right? Like that, they'll be convinced by the changes that occur that the vanguard pushes forward. I'm with you on all of that. The issue that I have is when you aggressively purity test those with the potential of becoming the vanguard, you must recognize that it's not just the sheep that are engaged in emotional reasoning. It's a condition of humanity. It is how humans think. And you have to mold and shape people to the best of your ability into coming into better ideas and better philosophy. And when you attack people aggressively for their inadequacies or their stupidity or their lack of understanding, you harden their heart, right? You, more often than not, you cause them to double down on their stupid positions as opposed to being open to learn. And so I think there is a balance that can be struck here where you can say, no, this is not true, this is wrong, and this makes your position not anarcho-capitalism, while still not using it as an opportunity to like quote tweet and like be like, this is to the audience, look at this person that's a fake AnCap, or you know what I mean, or like engage in such a way that forces them into a defensive position where they must defend their bad ideas and harden them away from what is the better philosophy. And I think that's the real issue here, is that you have to have an open dialogue to some degree with people that are willing and open. And if they're not willing and open, fuck them, right? But if you're engaged in attacking them and forcing them to protect their positions, what you're really doing is pushing the potential vanguard out and hardening it to only people who are already right.
Well, I'm far more interested in the audience, because the audience is almost always greater in numbers than the person I'm talking to directly. Right? So I care more about them. I care more about the audience. I care more about preaching to the audience than preaching to the person I'm talking to. And if the person I'm preaching and talking to, you know, if
let me give you a real
truly
quick
understand what I'm talking about, then they will concede.
I'm gonna just be honest with you, right? This is just a fundamental misunderstanding of psychology. If you're a dick, people will think you're wrong no matter how good your arguments are. That's the effect you're having on the audience. Is this person must be wrong because they're a dick? Because that's how brains. Yeah, but you're pushing even those people, their predilections lean that way. Even you.
I can tell you right now, I was convinced to anarcho-capitalism by a person who was very dickish to me, right?
Yeah, but you already admitted that you're super autistic, right? You're already admitting that, like, you know,
he convinced me by demonstrating the falsehood of my propositions.
Well, yes,
he wasn't nice about it. He wasn't nice about it, but he convinced me nonetheless.
Right. What convinced me was, ironically enough, Robert Murphy's chaos theory. I was a minarchist, right? And then I decided to be like, no, I'm an AnCap and I have to learn about what this is, and I have to be better about this, and like, and be right. But like, no, that's what I am, because absolutely, because, you know, I wasn't convinced that a market system of like justice was feasible or plausible. And then I read something that convinced me that it absolutely is plausible, even though it was from an anarcho-pacifist, right? But it was like, oh, this is potentially plausible. And so, yeah, I moved in that degree. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just burning people is going to be the best way towards convincing them. In fact, it's one of the least effective ways.
It'll convince those who actually matter. It'll convince those who actually matter about pushing this ideology. He wasn't nice about it. He said, "Hey,
it won't though.
Zulu, like, you're wrong. You're wrong.
Right,
be
but
better." And I was better because of it. I thank him every day.
I don't think
you're correct.
I think the overwhelming majority of people will just see that if you're being aggressive and you're being
overwhelming majority are wrong. They don't matter.
They do matter. They do matter, because eventually we have to convince them.
No, we don't.
You say that
we take political power, and then they will fucking fall along.
Right, but what you're saying,
what you're
saying at the same time, right, is that the sheep don't matter, right, and that the audience is not what's important. What's important are the thinkers, and then at the same time, you're saying that you're willing to alienate the thinker, right? Because they might not.
No.
Right, but that because the audience matters.
I'm saying you draw out the true thinkers from the audience by saying these radical ideas, saying these radically correct ideas. That is how you draw out the true vanguard from the audience. It's more efficient that way.
Nah. I don't think you do. I think people have to be led over time through ideas. And that, you know, it's certainly possible that you will gain some people that way, but I think you will alienate more potential allies that way than the ones that you gain. In terms of strategy, I think you will alienate more people that could have been the vanguard by behavior that turns them on. So let me give you an example, right? When I first saw Stefan Molyneux, right? My first impression of him was that he was an evil racist, because I was a hardcore lefty. Right? That was my first impression. I wasn't convinced by the strength of his arguments. I wasn't convinced by the ideas themselves. What I was convinced by was my emotions regarding someone that had a different opinion than me, and the behavior that they enacted in, and convinced myself of the moral superiority of me over him until life experiences and things put me into a better line of thinking. It wasn't his arguments that convinced me, right? It was my own research and life experiences and the time that it took to chisel away at my bad ideas and bad philosophy.
I mean, it very well may take a lot of time to get to a given person, right? But you should still make radical arguments. Like Stephen Molyneux definitely made radical arguments, right?
Yeah, well,
and it did end up convincing you.
I'm not saying the argument is the issue here. What I'm saying is the behavior in terms of strategy. The behavior towards acting aggressively towards those that need education and need to learn is the type of thing that turns people's brains off and makes them less likely to listen to reason and more likely to harden their bad beliefs.
It would take infinity years if I were to try and educate every single person who disagreed with me online in the ways of libertarianism. I have to take completely insane positions, completely radical positions, and just state them, and if people disagree, I ignore them. That has to be done, because there's an opportunity cost in educating a given person. The people who are apt to understand the position will respond in a given way. They'll respond in a certain set of ways, and I can learn how to pick up on that. And that is what I have to do. Or else I'm engaged in infinite education of people.
I don't know. I'm going to read a quote because I think this is basically my entire argument. It's from the horrendous murderer known as
Hans Hermann Hoppe?
Oh, no, much, much worse. Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, let me just find it really quote. So it's just one little paragraph, and I think, and I'll let Abraham Lincoln speak for me here because he makes the argument better. This is from his 1842 Temperance Address, right? He says, "To have expected them to do otherwise than they did, to have expected them not to meet denunciation with denunciation, crimination with crimination, and anathema with anathema, was to expect a reversal of human nature, which is God's decree, and never can be reversed. When the conduct of men is designed to be influenced, persuasion, kind, unassuming persuasion, should ever be adopted. It is an old and a true maximum that, quote, drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall, end quote. So with men, if you would win a man to your cause, first, convince him that you are his sincere friend. Therein is a drop of honey that catches his heart, which, say what you will, is the great highroad to his reason, and which, once gained, you will find but little trouble in convincing his judgment of the justice of your cause, if indeed that cause really be a just one. On the contrary, assume to dictate his judgment, or to command his action, or to mark him as one to be shunned and despised, and he will retreat within himself, close all the avenues to his head and his heart. And though your cause be naked truth itself, transformed to the heaviest lance, harder than steel and sharper than steel can be made, and though you throw it with more Herculean force and precision, you shall be no more able to pierce him than to penetrate the hard shell of a tortoise with a rye straw." I think he's right.
Right, so basically, I don't care for herding sheep, right? Because they can just be herded right away from you. If we're just doing the game of well, we're gonna herd these sheep away from the socialists, well then they can just herd it right back away from us, because they don't understand the philosophy by necessity.
Do you think
that is the problem?
Do you think that Slavoj Zizek is a sheep, just a dumb sheep?
Probably, yeah.
Interesting. Because what I would say is somebody like Slavoj Zizek is a great thinker that's wrong.
Oh, no, he's fucking retarded.
Stop saying the R word on Twitch. Yeah. Can't do that. Cannot do that. I have to denounce it on my stream or otherwise I get in trouble. Don't say the R word.
I don't know. Someone hacked my stream and they said it.
Right, but I would say that Slavoj Žižek is a great thinker that is wrong, and that this idea
what does Slavoj Žižek have which is great?
What do you mean? Like, what does he have that is great?
What thought has Slavoj Žižek made that is great?
They're all fucking wrong, but but he's obviously a high IQ individual that has the capacity to convince many others. This is someone that could be a part of the vanguard.
What is the great thought of Slavoj Žižek? What is the great thought of his?
God, I'd have to go back into his stuff. I know that I've listened to him before and been like, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Wrong, but interesting nevertheless. But the point isn't to say that his thoughts are great, because we're both AnCaps here. I agree that his thoughts are wrong, right? But what I'm saying is that there are high IQ individuals, but we have to recognize that there are plenty of potential people that could be vanguard thinkers, right? But for whatever reason, they've fallen into an ideology different than ours.
You won't like my answer here, because I don't think IQ is a very good metric at all.
What do you mean?
I think IQ is a very shoddy metric at best.
Okay, we're talking about general intelligence, G factor when I say IQ, but you're correct. Wisdom and IQ are not the same thing, right? And so someone can be very smart but very unwise, and maybe they won't go to our position because of their lack of wisdom.
Rather, I just think IQ is a poor predictor of basically anything.
A what?
Poor predictor. So like IQ.
What's a poor predictor?
Poor predictor.
Oh, okay.
IQ is not very good at predicting very much.
I mean,
there are better metrics.
A better metrics of G. There's no better metrics of G factor.
Well, you have what the fuck's the name? Five something. I can't remember.
But you mean the big personality, the 5 trait, big 5? Like
big
conscientiousness. And conscientiousness, neuroticism, openness, agreeableness, and now I forgot the other one. Oh, extroversion.
Yeah. That's the one.
Right, but we're talking about intelligence, not necessarily personality domains. But what you're saying is,
I think IQ is a neck down big 5. I think it is trying to predict personality, but it's presenting itself as something different. I think IQ is the best measure of G factor, in that G factor doesn't necessarily correlate to personality so much. Obviously there's openness, and openness to intellect is a portion of that, right? So there's going to be some correlation between openness to new ideas and intelligence for sure, which is also the greatest predictor of being politically left-wing, right? The more openness to ideas and intelligence you are, the more likely you are left-wing. But, sure, I mean, there's certain personality domains and things of that nature. I don't know, that's an interesting hypothesis, is that, like, these individuals will always be sheep because regardless of their intelligence or their charisma or their ability to influence others, they'll always be sheep because their personality domain is one that would kind of go against the principles that are required for anarcho-capitalism. I don't see any evidence to necessarily prove that in one regard, but it's not a bad hypothesis. And if that's your argument, fair enough. That's a decent argument. I don't know. I would be willing to. It'd be interesting to test that hypothesis. I'll basically leave it at that. That's the best I can do for you on that. That's an interesting hypothesis. Well, very well. I suppose, do we have anything more to talk about?
I'm not sure, unless somebody wants to spam a question or something to you from my chat. Or are you live streaming or are you recording? I don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm streaming right now.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions for me, if anybody's probably mad and wants to purity test me, if anybody's got any questions for LiquidZulu, throw them in chat. Otherwise, we're gonna open it up on our Discord and see what other people think, etc. What the fuck? What a weirdo. How can we justify not going north? What? Oof. I think you can go south by southwest. You can go west. You can go southwest if it is a quicker path north than continuing to go north. That's the short answer. I think you can. I think
communist.
I mean, like, if there's a wall and the quicker route around the wall is to engage in something that allows us to go north in a quicker way, you can go that direction.
He's a communist.
Just depends. It depends on the situation, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there are situations where there's no ethical choice here. I think immigration is a great example, right? Where, like, open borders is a position that requires private borders violation. Closed borders is a position that requires private borders violation. Like,
okay, right.
It's the wrong thing to focus on.
I need to address this right now because you brought it up. The fucking closed borders crowd who say that open borders implies private property violation, they don't understand open borders position. The open borders, nobody who's ever stated the open borders position has said, yeah, no, that means you're allowed to trespass on anybody's property. Nobody has ever said that. I don't know anybody who's ever literally said that. Never have I heard that. Right? You're not allowed to trespass.
That wouldn't be my argument either.
Open borders does not imply that you're allowed to trespass. Open borders just means that the state is not allowed to exclude you from state territory. That is all it means. So can the fucking closed borders crowd stop using that straw man, please?
No, the violation here is not that. The violation is the system of welfare that we have and the system of minimum wage and all of the other state systems that are violating property.
Yeah. That is a violation.
Right,
I agree.
But the open borders libertarian crowd necessarily forces individuals, because of anti-discrimination laws, from being able to have freedom of association, and furthermore requires more taxation and more theft in order to support this new population that comes in. So my position is that I agree with you that open borders is not necessarily a violation. Closed borders is what I would advocate. I'm with Hoppo on this, right? I would advocate a sponsorship system where we should allow anybody to come in, assuming that they have some form of sponsorship. And this should include businesses. This should include NGOs. This should include family members, whatever it is. But I think someone should have to co-sign for their loans to ensure that there's not additional violations in terms of taxation. Public schools are going to be a problem, etc. But like, it's just the wrong thing to focus on, and it's the wrong thing to advocate for, because we have so many other issues that confound with any border policy that we have.
It's like my analogy earlier, where you see somebody about to kill a beetles, and you prevent them from killing the beetles. You are not responsible.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the beetles then go on to make Helter Skelter, and then Marilyn fucking Manson, where
right,
he goes on to fucking kill a bunch of people. It's irrelevant to that. So,
right. So if you don't want to engage in any of the consequences argument, I get that, right? I'm it's obviously added fluff. I forget sometimes that I'm talking to another AnCap, because none of that shit matters, right? Like the additional taxes, whatever. Like you're correct, right? None of that shit actually matters. Sometimes I get into the mode of talking about the consequences of things because I'm so used to debating lefties. So let's just talk about the freedom of association, because the state does not allow freedom of association, which is to say freedom of discrimination. What the open borders does is it is a direct violation of people's freedom of association, because the state does not allow discrimination. I have no problem with open borders if individuals are allowed to say, for example, I refuse to rent property to you because you're Mexican. I refuse to rent property to you or sell property to you because of your ability to speak English, or any other reasoning there. The fact of the matter is that the state enforces private borders already by the Civil Rights Act and by other pieces of legislation. And by having an open borders policy, it necessarily requires additional forms of discrimination as well as closed borders. Both of these require that the state attack your rights to private property and borders by their open borders policy. And so the only answer here, I think, is the Hoppian position, which is, as so long as we have a state that does these things, we should engage in such a way as close to the private property owner as possible.
So basically, this is the state's like
not doing an Alex Jones impression right now. Sorry, I have a chance. I can do a quick Alex Jones impression while he thinks about his arguments just for a second, because we can obviously tell that this open borders libertarian Chi-Com cuck over here just wants to flood us with all of these individuals so that the Democrats can get their own voting base. All right, I'll leave it at that.
So yeah, basically, like, sorry, I really need to piss right now.
Yeah, go think about your position for a minute while you piss, right? 100%.
I really need to piss right now.
I love that you're just getting progressively more shit-faced as this goes. This is great. Do you, brother? The state sends FBI ATF agents to stop people from evicting trespassers from their property. Facts. At the border. This is true as well. But then we get into like an interesting conversation about like egress and things like that. Finally, the truth is out. The state can satisfy the needs of private citizens and new immigrants without discrimination. Well, if the state did that, I'd be cool with that. Can me and 4 million right-wing people buy a country-sized plot of land and enforce borders from other people for whatever reason in AnCap societies? Yeah. As long as it's voluntary. Scott, do not fear the Isaac. I don't fear the Isaac. I just don't engage with some of your silly circle jerk arguments with yourself. And recognize that people can be both closed borders and against both closed borders and the welfare state. Well, I'm aware of that, yes. That's going way back. Violating your ethics in order to achieve your ethical ends is consequentialism. Okay, no, it's not when both positions require a violation of your ethics. The only thing then to do is to move in the position towards, is to move into a position to attempt to get towards the ethical place where we no longer are forced to choose between two different unethical positions. If option A and option B both require that you violate your ethics, then what do? That's absurd. I just justified it.
So what the fuck were we saying?
I was basically saying that I'm somewhat Hoppian on it and removed all the consequentialist analysis and simply said that because the state doesn't allow freedom of discrimination, that both open and closed borders are a violation of private property rights. The other problem, of course, is that people on the southern border aren't allowed to enforce their private borders. People that have private property are not allowed to enforce their borders. So this is also a violation of private borders de facto if they allow people in and you're not allowed to shoot people for coming onto your property.
Right, so the later violation by the state of preventing you from excluding trespassers is kind of irrelevant to the fact that the state is unjust in preventing people from coming in to the state territory, right? Mm-hmm. That's irrelevant, right? So the state is not just in preventing people from coming into their territory. That
Right.
is necessarily true.
Okay.
So the fact that they might later prevent somebody from, preventing people from going onto their property is irrelevant.
Well,
So
it's not if they have.
Position.
It's not if we have an open borders position at the border. If your private property is at the border and you're not allowed to stop people, it is without a doubt an open border policy.
Yeah.
It's definitionally a private borders, definitionally a violation of private borders.
Yeah, but nobody who holds the open borders position
Mm-hmm.
that I know of, literally I've never heard this stance, that trespassing is not a crime. I've
Right.
never heard that stance.
Right, but that is part of the open borders position, unless it's like they have to go through checkpoints and they got to go through like plane rides, right?
That's not the open borders position. Is that
Right.
The state does not have the right to exclude people from their territory. The state doesn't have that right. Private property owners may still retain that right. And I agree.
Or
Private
may or may
property
not.
owners do have the right
Right.
to exclude people from their property.
Right, but the problem is that you're what you're doing is you're isolating the open borders position, right? And you're saying, and by isolating it, you're not engaging with the reality, which is that the policy itself is not isolated. It is intrinsically connected to and requires the other. So when you have an open borders position, it's not like, okay, we're just going to change this one and we're going to do this in a vacuum. I'm not engaging in consequentialism, right? I'm not saying that if you do this, then some other thing, will happen afterwards. What I'm saying is that the two policies are married together. That you see what I'm saying?
They might be married together in the state's mind, but they aren't in logic.
Exactly, which is the problem. Is that they are married together in the state's mind. Like we both want. It's not irrelevant when you're advocating policy. It's irrelevant when you're talking about the morality here. What we both want is.
So we're advocating morality. That's what we're doing when we're advocating policy.
But that's not. That's not true. When people say,
It
okay,
is.
no, you know that that's not true. When maybe it is for you specifically in this moment. But when people talk about the debate between the Hoppian closed borders strategy of like sponsorship, right, and the open borders position, this is a debate about policy because both people want private borders and no national borders. So what we're really talking about is policy.
I disagree. Because the Hoppians are saying that
Not the post-libertarians, by the way.
The Hoppians are saying that the state should exclude people from their territory under certain circumstances. That is incorrect.
That's not my position.
Never.
That's not my position. My position is how do we
Then
get...
you're an open borders libertarian.
I am for open borders, but if I'm told what policy should I support in order to get towards open borders isn't going to work. Because it is...
Depends what you define open borders as.
The open borders, right, has to include the right of discrimination. Otherwise, it's not open borders, right? If I say the nation state can allow people in, but you're not allowed to not rent to these people, you're not allowed to do all these other things, that is a policy prescription that is only part of open borders and not the whole of open borders. Ultimately, I am for private borders, which means open borders. But when advocating policy, I would say, how do we engage with the state as it exists now? And how do we make this situation better? I argue the Hoppian perspective so that we can reduce the power of the state in terms of welfare and theft, because the two are intrinsically tied together.
Right, but the question is, does the state have the right to exclude people from entering its territory?
No.
Exactly. That is the open borders position.
The state also does not have the right.
This right.
The state also doesn't have the right to disclose to stop us from freedom of discrimination in the way that we in title transfer. And yet the state does both. If the state does one without the other, it necessarily requires an increased violation here while decreasing a violation here.
What do you mean? How does it necessarily imply that? How does it necessarily imply that because you're preventing the state from engaging in aggression A, that therefore aggression B is raised?
If there's no change in the policy of aggression B, then the act of aggression A necessarily dictates an increase in aggression B. It must do so. So if you have more individuals that come, more immigration, larger amounts of immigration, right?
Hmm?
So let's say we go from, let's say, 1 million to 2 million, right? Per year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you have a set amount of people that do not want to, oh fuck, now we're getting into an Austrian economic situation where I can't actually prove this. Fuck you. You're right. I can't technically prove that.
I can abstract this. I can branch this off right now.
Mm-hmm.
Would you advocate under your Hoppian position that we restrict births? Because if we're going to restrict immigration, then why not restrict births? Why not make it so that people can't have sex?
This is disanalogous.
How is it disanalogous? Either way, you're introducing more people into the system.
It's not
You're
about
introducing more people into the welfare system, right? Births are analogous to immigration. It's more people being introduced.
I'll have to think about it more. Because obviously there's a difference, right? But is there a difference in the logical sense of rights violations? I don't know that there is, right? Because like obviously there's a difference between individuals that like don't speak English and aren't American and what that impact is on the ability to discriminate. But then again, that's looking at it from a consequences perspective, right? Not necessarily from a rights violations perspective.
Mm-hmm. What we're looking for is relevant differences.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good line of argumentation, right? Because it's still introducing more people into the system itself. Obviously there's a difference in the amount of discrimination and things like that, because there's a bias towards Americans for the desire to discriminate against individuals.
But not necessarily.
Right. That's what I mean. Like from an Austrian perspective, right? Like just looking at the economics, like you're assuming that this will be on the market without actually knowing that it'll be on the market, right? Like you're kind of like assigning a probabilistic characteristic that this would occur, but you don't necessarily know that because, you know, open borders could change our culture in such a degree that it actually changes the rates of discrimination. And I have no way of knowing that, right? Like what we're talking about is like an individual rights violations. Yeah. I mean, like I get where you're coming from there. I don't know. You might be right on this.
I am right on this.
Yeah. I think you're probably right on this. I still think that
I'm right on this.
I think there's an inherent violation. So I would say two caveats. Number one, I think there's an inherent violation by if the open borders policy allows people to cross and trespass, right? That the open borders must be required. The open borders policy is an act of aggression if it allows people to cross the border onto other people's private property and doesn't allow them to defend their border.
I agree there. There.
And that I think consequences would require from a strategic position, right? That this be like one of the things I'm less focused on, because I recognize that this probably isn't the best way to convince people, because it probably does more harm than good in terms of convincing people of our argument. But when presented with what do I vote for? What do I choose to support? When asked, what do I do? Right? Yeah, you're probably right.
There we go. We win those.
I don't know when Lucas made this argument, but Wellspring, but I appreciate, I guess, I don't remember that, but fair enough. Also, I'm not going to lie. A lot of times I don't understand. What is it you guys are debating exactly? I don't think we're debating per se. I think we're just ironing out ideas, and LiquidZulu is helping me be a better AnCap after he was a dick to me on Twitter. I think that's mostly what we're doing.
Hey, you were the wrong one.
You're still a dick.
I'll be a dick, but I'm correct.
All right, so I think we're good. I think it's time for us to move on. I think we're getting towards a natural close. At least I am towards moving on. The only thing I want to say is, do you want back in my Discord server? Do you care?
Not particularly.
All right. All right. Well, then you're not allowed back in.
Fair enough.
I love you, but come on, man. I want you in the Discord server. I just want you to promise to not call my black moderator the N-word.
Did I do that?
Yes, you called him the N-word, and then he called you out on it, and I called you out and was like, hey, dude, don't do that. And you were like, no promises. And then I was like, yo, I have to ban you now.
That is very funny.
That is what you did. And I was like, dude, like, you didn't even say no promises. You sent a GIF that was like, no promises. And I was like, dude, like, no. And then you were like, I can't make any promises. Like,
that is very funny. So I'm not gonna backtread on such a
wait, no, just come on, man. Will you follow the rule? I will unban you. I want you here. I will unban you. The only thing I need is for you to say I won't call the black moderator the N-word. To be fair to all those listeners, he did use the A, not the hard R. But still, motherfucker.
That is very funny.
It's not fun. It's hilarious, but also I had to ban you.
It's very funny. That is quite funny. Okay, I'll say that. That is quite funny.
Come on, will you promise not to do it? I'll unban you, please.
Which one's the black moderator?
Wellspring Con.
Oh, Wellspring. I hate Wellspring.
Wellspring also in my chat saying he wasn't being malicious either. You were jokingly saying it, and he was like, please don't. And then you were like, meh, maybe I won't. And I was like, dude, like, like, I don't want my Discord nuked. Come on.
Well, I mean,
we promise not to do it.
Okay, I'll promise not to do it.
All right, well, let me write it down. I will unban you, and you can come back whenever you want. So you can proselytize and argue with people on my server too, because you're a strong fucking AnCap, and I want you there to roast people, and I can be the nice ear since we disagree on strategy here, and you can roast the fuck out of people, and then I'll be like, come talk to me and let me explain this a little better.
I'll be the devil, you be the
we'll be good cop,
angle.
bad cop, all right? Maybe that's the right answer. Maybe we're both right. Maybe you can be bad cop and I can be good cop.
Oh no, I'm definitely right.
Oh, fuck off. All right, brother. It was nice talking to you. It was nice catching up with you. It was nice hammering out. This has been Saturday at what I've titled thus far Nerd Wars, and we're moving on to more Nerd Wars things. If you guys want to talk to me or whatever, hop in my Discord. And here it is in chat. If you're here, come hop in the Discord and we'll do whatever. But I'm glad to be able to unban you because I love you, LiquidZulu. You're a great compass.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be unbanned. Liberty, Scott.
All right, brother. I'll see you around.
Yep, see you, man.
Did you have anything you wanted to say or shout out or anything?
I want to shout out my YouTube channel.
Yeah, there you go. LiquidZulu on Twitter. It's fuck poor people. Or it's at LiquidZulu, but his name is fuck poor people. And I prefer to tell people to search fuck poor people instead of LiquidZulu because it's just funny and based. All right, boys.
He's very funny. He's very funny.
All right, I'm going to hop out of here.
Oz is calling Wellspring the N-word.
Okay, well, you're drinking enough to where I now want to get out of here because I'm worried about what you might do. Also, this was hold on, pause. This was 2 days after you said the F slur on Politically Provoked. So it was like, dog, this guy's wild.
No. I also said the N-word on Politically Provoked.
Right, it was 2 days after you did that, and I was like, dog, we gotta my Discord's gonna get taken down. Like politically, like people are gonna hop in my Discord and be like, he's here, and start reporting my Discord. Like I can't do this.
Yeah, no. You want to know a funny story about that, right?
So long as it doesn't involve you actually saying the N-word, yes.
No. I'll avoid it. Basically, there's this guy called I can't remember his name. Flaunsy. Yeah.
Flaunsy TV or Flaunsy TV. Yeah, I know him.
Yeah. He
pretend
was,
right winger leftist.
Oh no, he's an actual cuckold. He was pissed off that I said the N-word on the drinking chat, and so he cancelled our debate.
Oh god, there's so many of those people. Twitch is such like the YouTube community is so much better, but YouTube sucks so much for live streaming. Wish it was better.
At least it saves VODs, you know. That's what I do for it.
It what?
Saves VODs.
Oh yeah. I mean, I usually do both. I just take my better content and put it on YouTube.
Fair enough.
All right, brother.
Anyway, yes, I'll see you later, bro.
Yeah, and check me out, Fabian Liberty. I've only got like 660 subs on YouTube, but I passed 4,000 watch hours like a long time ago. So like, if anybody wants to check me out on YouTube, like we're trying to get monetized on YouTube at some point, because for whatever reason I have a great amount of watch hours to subs, but like I can't get the goddamn subs, which is the exact opposite problem everyone else has.
Same here.
Yeah. Must be the AnCap content. People are more interested. They don't click off. Who knows?
Yeah.
And the YouTube algorithm is like, no.
Hey, I'll actually send you a server link later. If you remind me, I'll send it to you definitely. Where we have a bunch of AnCaps in a server. We're discussing how to make content.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. But I'm going to hop out of here. I'll be in my Discord if you want to come and talk and bitch about the bad ideas I had or my changing of opinions. I'm super open-minded. I think LiquidZulu has probably I mean, I'll have to think about it and solidify it. I don't want to change my opinion because of one conversation, but you know, I think you've solidified a few things on me. I'm still stopping the guy from committing suicide, but other than that, I think everything else I'm with you on.
Communist.
Yeah, that makes me a commie, of course. Yo, no bullshit.
Fucking pinko.
Yeah, fucking pinko. No bullshit. Fucking after that Carolyn Borisenko thing, the only avenue of attack that she's done against me is because my name is Fabian Liberty, based off of like the strategy of Fabian Society. She's going around everywhere being like, this guy's a socialist. He's a full-blown socialist. Look at his name. And I'm just like, this bitch, like this non-libertarian lefty is just like out here like, he's a fucking socialist everywhere. People keep coming in. They're like, how are you? You're a fucking socialist, Fabianism. And I'm like, oh my God, it's just an argument of like strategy on how we get shit done. Like, fuck off.
Then stop being a Fabian.
No.
There's your solution.
No.
I'll kill you.
Don't punch your cheap ass camera, all right?
I can punch it because it's cheap.
You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.